Okay, go ahead. Our mics are live.
Hello, I'm from the Australian Government. As you may have noticed, we're in the process of transitioning to authoritarianism.
Don't worry, you don't need to do anything. In fact, doing and saying nothing will greatly assist us in this process. For guidance, just look to the Labor Party.
Sadly, not everyone knows how to be a quiet Australian.
That's why, to ensure a smooth transition to authoritarianism, we're launching a new initiative. Introducing the Quiet Australia Policy.
Under the Quiet Australia Policy, Australia will be home only to quiet people, such as quiet whistleblowers, because we're prosecuting all the loud ones who expose our shit fuckery, like how we abuse the tax system and defraud our neighbours, commit war crimes and spy on all of you.
We'll also have quiet journalists, because the ones who do their job by publishing those leaks will get their asses raided or thrown in jail to please our masters, because journalists aren't above the law, except when they publish what we leak to them for our political interests, in which case they are.
A quiet FOI agency, where if you lodge a request, you get
Hello darkness, my old friend.
Quiet charities, because if they dare to endorse a political party, we'll strip them of their tax-deductible status.
and quiet corporations. Just kidding. They can spend millions to buy politicians and we'll let them claim it as a tax deduction because we believe in the free market.
Unless you use that freedom to boycott companies with ties to coal mines and climate-denying lobby groups, in which case we'll make boycotts illegal.
How good are quiet shoppers and quiet shareholders?
We also love quiet protesters, because nothing says free speech like some pepper spray in the fucking face.
Quiet school kids. Because the little shits should be seen and not heard.
And now that everything's on fire thanks to our total paralysis on the climate crisis, we especially like quiet scientists, quiet conservationists, and quiet fire chiefs, because fuck experts.
But hey, if you're a QAnon conspiracy nutjob, our PM will not only listen to your bullshit, he'll also put it in his speeches.
Cool and normal.
The quietest Australians are of course those we drove to suicide with our illegal debt recovery schemes.
The First Nations people murdered in our custody.
The elderly who die from negligence in our underfunded aged care homes.
And all the species about to go extinct under our watch. When you put all that together, you start to see the neoliberal shit show on a quietly dead-ass planet we're preparing for you and your kids.
Which is why, above all, the Quiet Australia policy relies on a quiet you.
Because the idea of loud fire chiefs,
Conservationists,
scientists,
school kids,
protesters,
charities,
unions,
broadcasters,
whistleblowers,
journalists,
women,
First Nations people,
and you, all joining forces to say fuck authoritarianism scares the shit out of us.
And here at the Australian Government, the last thing we want is a Prime Minister who loses his shit. Authorised by the Department of Quiet Supremacy.
Okay, and we're live.
Live. All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to the free Assange online vigil series. My name is Taylor Hudak, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Andrew Smith, Christy Doff, and Steve Poikinen. So today marks 3,284 days since the brutal arrest of WikiLeaks publisher and multi-award-winning journalist Julian Assange, and 266 days since Chelsea Manning has been in prison, and she is now up to $157,000 in fines. So tonight we have a really exciting evening for you guys. We have a lot of news to touch on, and we have two very special guests who will also be joining us. And our first guest of the evening is Ray McGovern. Ray is a former CIA intelligence analyst and co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, or VIPS, which exposes how intelligence was being justified or being falsified to justify the war on Iraq. Ray is now an activist who strongly condemns torture as a form of interrogation and advocates for accountability within the intelligence community. And he joins us now. So Ray, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
You're welcome, Christy. Doing well.
Thank you. So you just recently appeared on RT America, and you shared a really unique and I think valuable viewpoint on Julian Assange's case, which was that you actually expressed a really positive outlook on this, and you feel that he may end up victorious in this. And I found that was very interesting. Oftentimes we have guests who come on who share a really negative viewpoint, and that's not, fault of their own, but many people feel that this may not end well for him. However, you share a positive view, so I wanted you to touch more on that.
Well, I think that Julian, who's a good friend, has an indomitable spirit. You know, he's not going to give up, and he's probably not giving them much of what they want under torture. You know, as I visualize why they're doing this to him, they have to shut WikiLeaks down. I mean, it's a very bad example uh, for those who don't want the truth out. And so they'd like to find out who his associates are, how he succeeds in this magic of getting this stuff out without them being able to stop him or catch him. Now, part of my optimism is not only because of the kind of character, and I mean character that that he is, Julian, but you know, if the British election goes to Labour, my God, and that's possible now. It seems to me, from this side of the pond, like maybe the English aren't. Well, let me put it this way: maybe they're smarter than I thought they were, and won't be captivated by more of the same. So let's just posit that Jeremy Corbyn has a chance. Now, my God, what would that mean to these people who want to silence Julian, who want him never to see the light of day again, who want to give him to the United States, their puppeteers? I think we're in a week of maximum danger here, because if you put your mindset, you put your mind in the mindset of these criminals. Uh, as the election approaches, if it looks like Corbyn might win, I'm afraid for Julian's health. And what I'd really like to advocate for is the UN finally stepping up. You know, it's very nice to talk about, illegal detention. And it's very nice that Niels Melzer, and I admire him greatly, will speak out as the UN rapporteur against torture. But we need more. We need the UN to demand daily access to Julian. We need to see that he's okay for the next 10 days at least. These seem to me the maximum danger. I'm elated that this new hope has come closer to becoming true, namely a Labour victory in Britain. And there are other things. There is a groundswell now coming up. People, somebody was talking the other day about the taxi drivers in London. They're on Julian's side, just as we are, the common people. And as you know, around the world now, not only in London and Chile and Iraq and elsewhere, the people are showing their muscle. So I have hope. I've always had hope, and most of it depends on the character, the strong backbone of Julian himself. And I'd add that it's not only him that he's worried about. People don't know him to be the compassionate person he is, the empathy that he shows. And I'll just give one vignette to reflect that. You know, after Ed Snowden got out of Hong Kong, I mean, Ed was willing to give it all up. He said the CIA station's right down the road here. I fully expect them to get to this hotel pretty soon. So let me tell you all I need to give you the stuff. Well, they didn't find a hotel for some reason, and somehow Sarah Harrison, who was dispatched there, as you know, and Ed found refuge in the most unlikely of places. And then I don't know how, but got spirited on that Aeroflot flight and out of harm's way. That was a miracle. So why do I mention that? Well, that happened because Julian Assange cared enough about Ed Snowden. Ed hadn't given him a piece of paper. I mean, Ed dealt with other people. It's not like Julian was protecting his own source. No, he was protecting something much bigger. And when I told him, I think the second time I visited him in the Ecuadorian embassy, well, Julian, I admire a lot of stuff. I admire you for a lot of things you've done, and who you are, but nothing, nothing greater than what you did in getting Ed Snowden out of Hong Kong. And you probably know that Julian is not given to a lot of emotion. But he got off the couch and he said, yes, yes. We had to beat them. We had to make sure that not everybody ends up like Chelsea Manning. We just had to do that. And then it was over. Now, he doesn't claim a lot of praise for that or due respect, but the US government knows how it went down. And, if you're looking for reasons that the US government wants to silence Julian, it wants to make an example of him, well, you can't forget that it was Julian who called in all his chits from all the people he knew in that part of the world and got Sarah, wonderful person that she is, an effective person, to do the right thing with Ed. It was just this short of a miracle, and it's one of the reasons the U.S. Really hates him. The other, of course, the obvious ones are exposing U.S. war crimes. That horrible collateral murder video, where 12 Iraqi citizens were gunned down mercilessly, and you hear the Apache helicopter people gloating over what happened. A man man was killed trying to bring his kids to school. That was really bad, and everyone could see that. Everyone who had to look far on our TV to see it, but they could. And one thing that people don't know about that is that there was a man named David Finkel. Now, who's David Finkel? Well, he was with that unit. He's a Washington Post reporter. He saw the film. And what did he do? See no evil? Yeah. He wrote a book about the unit. I forget what the name of it, but Heroes of Iraq. Now, all this went down during the so-called surge, which was totally unnecessary, urged on Bush and Cheney by people like Petraeus, who said, look, Mr. Bush, Mr. Cheney, you're going to lose this war. You're going to go out of town here with your tail hanging behind you unless you send in a surge and we beat up we separate the Shia from the Sunni in Baghdad. Well, it was merciless. How many U.S. Troops suffered death? 1,000 under that thing. And that all happened at the same time that collateral murder was shown so graphically by the thing that Julian was given, Chelsea Manning. I'll say, well, let's see, I guess it really needs to be mentioned that there was a proximate cause besides Ed Snowden, besides collateral murder, besides all the other things in those cables that were released. And that was that somebody in the CIA knew how to get stuff to Julian Assange. Now, I don't know how that's done, but it was done. And what was this stuff? This stuff was a package of cyber tools called Vault 7. Now, what's that all about? Well, Vault 7 was what the CIA, with NSA's help. Now, NSA has the charter for electronic stuff, but CIA likes to do the dirty work, and NSA is just happy to have the CIA do the dirty work. In a word, John Brennan 5 years ago combined people in a separate directorate in the CIA, or got a lot of NSA people in, and they developed offensive cyber tools. Now, somebody in the CIA, I guess, felt, this is going a little too far. This is a tool that could take control of your car as you're driving down Sunset Boulevard and make it go 110 miles an hour and get you killed, right? Or it's another tool was, you think you're in your bedroom alone or with your other, and you think the TV is off, but it's not off. It's recording everything you say or do. Now, those things were so electric, so controversial, that in March of 2017, the New York Times ran the stories. Man, these are great stories, taking control of the car, being able to spy through a TV. But then on the 31st of March, was released this marble framework tool, part of the Vault 7 collection of tools, offensive cyber tools. Now, that was really, really important. Why? Well, because this tool was the result of work going over 20 years. And let me just, this won't take long, but here I am on the 31st of March, 7 o'clock in the morning, not even awake. The phone rings. And I said, yeah, what's that? This is RT. You have to come in. I said, come on. Boom. No, bring it. Hello? RT, no, this is RT. You have to come in right away. I said, you're not even open yet. Well, we want you to come to the Eurovision studios. Why? Well, take a look at your email. All right, I'll take a look at the email. So I did. Wow. What was this tool? This tool was a capability to hack into a server or a bunch of computers, disguise who hacked in, and leave telltale signs like, Cyrillic, Russian, Chinese, Korean, Arabic, or Persian. So you could disguise who actually, I didn't blame it on somebody else. I said, wow, yeah, I'll come in. So there I am driving down the carpool lane, all alone, getting into the studio in time, 9 o'clock. And I had the presence of mind to call Bill Binney, who is a former NSA technical director, one of our veteran intelligence professionals for Sandy. I said, Bill, you know about this mobile framework? He said, oh, yeah, I know about it. We started working on that while I was still there about 20 years ago. I said, okay, well, what do I say about this? No, Bill is a technical guy. He makes fun of me because I'm a history major, right? So he has to explain things to me about 3 times. So he says, look, Ray, this is what it is. 700 million lines of code. So McGovern says, gosh, that sounds like a lot, Bill. Yeah, you get that right, Ray. Can you still multiply? 1 line of code costs $25. I can't multiply in a car, Bill, but so you tell them that's how much it costs. That's how long it was under preparation. And yes, they can do these things. I mean, it's very much like what they blamed the Russians for doing. So I was all set. My loins were girded, and I went on RT. And Sputnik also asked me that day, but nobody else was interested in what I had to say about Marble Framework. The idea is this. This was poison. This was really, really serious. Okay. Now, did the New York Times publish on that? Well, they had taken control of the car. They'd done the TV. But for some reason, they got the memo. No, don't say anything about this. Ironically, and luckily, Ellen Nakashima from the Washington Post didn't get the memo. And to her credit, she saw the explosive nature of this thing, and she did a really good article, which showed that they're working these 5 languages I just mentioned. We learned that it was used during 2016, and her headline was "Leak Exposes Cyber Warfare on Part of the CIA." So it was a really good article. But after that, nothing. Now, during this period, Julian, as I understand it from the press, was trying to negotiate some modicum of freedom. And in return for that, he was talking to lawyers from our Justice Department who are acting for the CIA. That's the way it works, Justice Department lawyers. And he said, look, I'd be willing to tell you who it wasn't. I'd be willing to give you technical information to tell you who it wasn't that hacked into the Democratic National Committee. And the lawyers thought they had something going pretty good here because they naively thought that the U.S. government would be interested in who it wasn't. So what happens? Some stupid lawyer decides, oh, I know that Mark Warner, a senator on the Senate Intelligence. I wonder if he could help us out. So he tells Warner. First thing Warner does is call up James Comey. He said, did you know that this deal is in the making? No, I didn't. Call it off. Shut down. It was shut down. Julian saw that it was all being done in bad faith. let out marble framework, and they really hate him for that. And I don't need any more proof than the fact that 8 days later, the head of the CIA, a fellow named not John, but Mike Pompeo, he's the pompous guy who, he's a true believer in what they call the lifting, the rising. We're going to be left behind, but the rapture, yeah. But what he doesn't know, and what I'm trying to get through to him, is that there's a weight limit on the rapture, and I don't think he's going to make it. So maybe you ought to go back to duty, honor, and country. The motto there. But kidding aside, this was a biggie. Okay, so Pompeo gets up 8 days later at this think tank in Washington, and he says Julian Assange is a demon. Demon. Now I always had a little trouble believing in demons, right? And but some people do believe in demons, and Pompeo apparently is one. He says a demon, and he's running a non-state hostile intelligence agency. Oh, what's that? I mean, hello, is that a new category of thing? Meanwhile, they're working on the Ecuadorian government, offering them all kinds of stuff so that they would close down close Julian out of there. So it was really an insidious combination of big fat Pompeo and those guys that were offering military and economic assistance, the IMF loans and so forth, to the successor regime in Ecuador that worked to first silence Julian, impede his visitors, to make sure that he got more and more isolated. And then finally, as we all know, on April 11th, making gosh, what do you call that? They drag him out unceremoniously. I got so angry just watching that photo. It won't leave my mind. So that I decided, well, I'm not going to shave. I just let this thing grow until Julian is released. And so that's why I look disheveled. I don't want to look shoveled. I don't want to look kempt. I look unkempt. I don't want to look kempt as long as Julian is being tortured there in that prison. And it's a very small price to pay, but my wife is long suffering. She's hopeful in lots of extra ways that Julian will be released soon. But every time I pass a window or a mirror, I say, well, Julian, think about Julian. Lift up a little prayer for Julian. And it's a very good reminder to do that. And I've appealed for others to join me. Women would have to find their own little sacramentals, is what we'd call it. The response has been underwhelming, and I have to admit, for the Julian Assange beard movement.
So I do want to get to some questions from our viewers that they have for you, because in a few minutes we will have our second guest joining us, and I know that my co-hosts have some particular topics that they want to address with the two of you. But before we get to that, one of our viewers, Propaganda, our friend Quinn, he wants to know, what is your perspective on the current state of the CIA, specifically the organization receiving a lot of celebrity endorsements? I know that you touched on Mike Pompeo, of course, who was the not too long ago, the head of the CIA. All of us here on the Free Assange Vigil are extremely critical of him. He is no longer in that seat. But yeah, if you could answer that question, just give us your perspective on how you see the current state of the CIA now.
Well, it's funny you should ask, because I'm asked that regularly. And I used to say, well, there are basically two CIAs. There's the analysis group that Truman wanted to be able to go to and say, look, you're working for me. I know the Pentagon says the Russians are 10 feet tall. You tell me how tall they really are. I know the State Department is defending this policy. You tell me whether that's working or not. Without fear or favor, you report to me. That's what, if you were president, wouldn't you like to have a group like that? Would you really like that? When I used to tell people in Washington, there's one group that has no political agenda. And in Washington, people say, yeah, right, yeah, well, yeah, tell us another one. And I could tell them that the analysis group could tell it like it was. Now, that wasn't universally so. In Latin America, you had a bunch of corruption on the analysis side as well as the operational side. But by and large, it was so hermetically sealed, the analysis from the operations. There were turnstiles inside the building when I first got there in 1963. Turnstiles, okay? You can go to the operations part without a special permission, and the operators couldn't come to the analysis part. Now, that seemed a little odd, but when you look at what happened now with John Brennan joining the two, okay? Now, what's an analyst on Afghanistan going to do now? He'll become a targeteer. He or she will be targeting this drone or that drone and not worrying about, well, why are we there, or what's the prospects for Afghanistan, or do we really have to? So the big questions are being, not only not addressed, but when they are addressed, they're through this political filter. And so now, when people ask me, should my daughter really want to go work for the CIA? I say, well, I still say, well, does she have courage? And and does she have the you know honesty? Is she ethical? Yeah. Well, sure. Send her there, but she's got to. That's what we need. But she's got to realize that she may have to quit like real quick if they ask her to fold to mess with the intelligence. So it's a sad story. I've never seen it so sad. I used to say, well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a baby on rare occasions, like Iran, and this is a good example. It won't take very long to explain it. At the end of the Bush-Cheney regime, their plan was to start a war with Iran. Very clear. It's clear from Bush's own memoir. He must have written those 3 pages himself. But what happened was, honest analysts put out an estimate, and they said Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003. Got it? This was an estimate dated November 2007. And they're saying 4 years earlier, is that right? 4 yeah. 4 years earlier, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon. That was explosive. As a matter of fact, George Bush in his memoir says, this was a bombshell. He says, it deprived me of the military option. He says it. He says, well, how could I authorize airstrikes on a country that the intelligence community says has no active nuclear weapons program? Bummer. Now, if they were really concerned about nuclear weapons in Iran, the appropriate reaction, in my view, would have been, oh, wow, are you sure? Check that. Oh, call the Israelis right away. Hey, not to worry. The Iranians stopped 4 years ago. Oh, let's break out the champagne. No, they wanted to get them and drive off into the sunset, leaving a war to whoever succeeded them. So that's very clear from the memoir. So what I'm saying here is that there was this sacrosanct quality of the analysis that we did. I worked on Russia and the Soviet Union, so there wasn't much, political finagling there. But this fellow, Tom Finger, who came in from the State Department to run this estimate, did a really good job, kept it secret even from the White House. And when it hit the fan, when it hit the press, there was no attacking Iran. So that is the only, and I was with the CIA for 27 years and I've been watching things for almost 50 now. The only time I could say with confidence that the CIA played a major role in stopping an unnecessary, and that would have been a disastrous war. Okay, so it's possible. But now I think that even those folks are few and far between now. And I say, for example, with respect to this latest Ukraine gate, where they're trying to impeach Trump because of this stuff on Ukraine. Well, who is the whistleblower? Who is the guy that started this whole thing off? A CIA analyst? My God, So I'm going on here, but that's how corrupt it is. And of course, I got thrown out of the Senate hearing when Gina Haspel was named the new director, because everyone there on that panel, everyone on that Senate Intelligence Committee panel knew that she directed the torture, the waterboarding, and worse of those folks in Thailand, where she was the chief of base or chief of station. So
Right. And
got
you know
pretty.
what? We know that, I'm sorry, we know that, of course, torture is a very ineffective interrogation method. Before we do continue on with the conversation, I do want to introduce our next guest of the evening. We are now joined by Jason Burmis. Jason is a YouTube content creator and documentary filmmaker, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with his film, Loose Change. Jason is also an activist. I believe that all four of us have been on his show. He has an awesome YouTube channel. If you are not already familiar with him, do subscribe to his channel. Do follow him on Twitter. He really produces some great stuff. Jason, how are you doing?
Very good, and never cut Ray McGovern off for me. Ray's in my film Fabled Enemies from 2008. I've met it on several occasions. It's probably been almost 10 years since the last time I talked to him, but his work has been stellar. I tuned in probably 10 minutes after he came on, and him talking about Vault 7 is so important. And the fact that he actually confronted James Clapper about how they never even looked at the DNC server. So they didn't, so basically they didn't have to confirm that it wasn't what they said it was. And, he talks about Ukraine Gate and all these propaganda events that engulf the general public and distract them away from the real issues. And the real issues are that we're about to extradite Assange to this country. It's really going to happen, and criminalize the publication of documents like Vault 7 that expose to the world that these inner agencies are spying on everything we do.
I just real quick, I'm glad Ukraine got brought up, because and that you mentioned specifically, Ray, that the person who is the whistleblower is in fact a CIA agent. Is, for the record, if you work for the CIA and the thing that you're blowing the whistle on is not the CIA, you are not a whistleblower. You're a guy who has followed orders and has gone forth and done them to the best of their ability. You mentioned the politicizing of the intelligence services, and I think that bears out so much in terms of former members of intelligence now being members of Congress, members of the Senate. And we've got one running for president in Pete Buttigieg. When did that become a thing? You had to have been at the CIA when it was just kind of open season on political office. Was that something that was ever discussed, or is there a history that we're kind of unfamiliar with? Just shed a little bit of light on that, please.
Sure. Well, Steve, you may have heard me say this before, and Jason too. I've been around now 50 years, very active in Washington and watching things. And you see a lot of change in 50 years, but there's one change that dwarfs all the others in importance, and that is that we no longer have a free media. Now, the media that we do have is all of a sudden intelligence community friendly. I mean, they've forgotten what the intelligence community did, the fraud that was used to justify the attack on Iraq. Look what's happened in Iraq now, for God's sake, it's 18 years ago. They've forgotten all that now because the intelligence community doesn't like Trump, and the major media doesn't like Trump. They're all in cahoots together. And so if you want to run for Congress and you're from the CIA, now you sort of get a foot forward simply by virtue of that. At the bottom of all this is something that I call the Mickey Mat. Okay. Now, if you got a pencil, you can think about it. Okay. Mickey Mat. We used to talk about the Mick. That was not an Irishman. No, this is military industrial complex, right? Mick. Okay. Now it's the Mickey Mat. I'll take you through it. Military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Okay. Now, why do I say media? Because media is in all caps here. It's the sine qua non. It's the catalyst. It's the thing that makes it all possible. And when I look around, talk to members of my own family, pretty discerning people, they all believe the Russians hacked the DNC. And no one will even entertain the notion that, well, no, there's lots of evidence that they never did. There's lots of evidence that that was an inside job, lots of evidence. So, and from reputable people with no access to grind. So what I'm saying here is that as long as the CIA and the NSA and the FBI are all in good odor, and running for office is a piece of cake, and many of them made it last time. Now the warning is, of course, that this may not last more than another week, because the FBI or the Department of Justice Inspector General is coming out with his inspection of how the FBI worked to exonerate Hillary Clinton and deprive Trump, they thought, of ever becoming president, and then putting the kibosh on his presidency. How that all happened. Now that's something going on. The other one, John Durham, a prosecutor up in Connecticut, is looking at how the CIA and rest of the intelligence community worked against Trump before the election and then afterwards. Now, when that happens, the media is going to have a real dilemma. Okay, are they going to report this? I think there's a good possibility, unless Trump chickens out, and Bill Barr, I think, will try to prevent him from chicken out, that James Comey, former FBI, John Brennan, former CIA, James Clapper, former guru of the intelligence community, McCabe, Comey's deputy, and a couple of high officials from the Justice Department will be indicted. Indicted, okay? That's big. Now, the information is there. How do I know that? Well, what became very clear to me, people will say to me, now, Ray, for God's sake, you're talking about the highest intelligence, the highest law enforcement figures under the Obama. You're telling me they're all crooked? And say, yeah, I'll tell you that. Well, how can you say that? Because I got proof. How do you get proof? Look, they were so sure Hillary's going to win. And they wanted to keep it in this little top level cabal that they didn't take rudimentary security procedures to run some red herrings across their trail, prevent the stuff from getting in computers. And so the Senate and the House and the administration has all the material in writing that they need to indict these guys. The only question is whether Trump, as I said before, has the cojones, has the guts to go through with this, because these
Right.
are.
Let me ask you, because I think it's interesting you say that. Like, personally, I don't think he does. I don't think it's going to end up happening. And in large part because of that permanent state you were just talking about, enabled by the media. For instance, look at how lockstep just recently Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, every single one, you're abandoning the Kurds in Syria by leaving the Turkish border. And who was it? Everybody agrees in the intelligence community. Everybody agrees, and they're parroting that same exact thing. And while you have Trump in the media talking about the military-industrial complex, and probably at the highest note in April, just before the non-attack in Duma, that more and more information is coming out via WikiLeaks, by the way. They're still relevant. That new email comes out via them just last week. But what did Trump say that week? It's time to leave Syria. He starts talking in two different speeches about now it's time to go. Fast forward a year plus after he sent missiles in there after an attack didn't happen. Let me reiterate, that did not happen in Duma, and nobody's called him on it except for Tucker Carlson in this country, and that's scary. Okay, so that's extremely scary. But you get to now, and say 6 months ago, he's talking about the military-industrial complex and how they're throwing a fit and they're very real when he wants to leave Syria. But then in the same breath, he says, well, we can't leave Afghanistan because it's the Harvard University of terrorism for Al-Qaeda. Yet we work with Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, and their allies where? In Syria. I think that it's just such a hard thing for people to grasp. That same intelligence community, Ray, they're the ones that started the conflict in Syria via Operation Timber Sycamore. How many Americans even have an idea what Timber Sycamore is? I'm going to say it's 0.001%, maybe. And why is that? because the media doesn't report on it, Ray.
Yeah, so that's the fly in the ointment, and I agree with you on all that. And the other thing I'd simply adduce is the example of when it became necessary under congressional law to divulge the rest of the papers from CIA and FBI on John Kennedy's assassination about 2.5 years ago. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, I do. He didn't do it twice. He promised us that. Listen, that's another great point to make, Ray, because this guy came in, he said he was going to fight the deep state. He's going to expose all these people. Like you said, Brennan, Clapper, the whole bunch, they're very indictable. The crimes are open. We've seen them. They're on paper. You're 100% correct. But he couldn't expose the deep state twice from 50 years ago that assassinated Kennedy. I went through a lot of those documents. There was some new information. There was some interesting stuff. But at the end of the day, if you can't classify or declassify documents now that are 50 plus years old that do expose the corruption of our FBI, of our CIA, of working with actual literal gangsters throughout the years as not only informants, but people that enforce their policies for plausible deniability, how are you going to do it today?
Well, that's just it. In other words, this was particularly graphic because when he got up that morning, that is, he got up before the microphones, the president said, well, now Congress has this law and the rest of the CIA and the FBI papers on JFK's assassination are going to be released today according to the law. And then remember at 3:30 in the afternoon, he got up before the same microphones and he said this. I'm sorry, we changed our mind on that. The CIA and the FBI won't let me release it. So we're going to revisit it in 6 months. Now, McGovern takes out his little pad, and he writes, whatever it was, 6 months, I can count, 6. All right. So 6 months comes. I ask around, well, what's the deal? Nobody remembers, I mean, the mainstream press didn't want to deal with it. So there is the archetypical example of how he says one thing in the morning, deep state comes in and says, no, we're not going to let you do that. But the reason I pin my hope on this is it's so flagrant. And Nunes from the House Intelligence Committee, he's seen the documents. So we're talking about felonies. We're talking about getting surveillance on American citizens on false grounds. We're talking about all kinds of other things. And I may be misreading Bill Barr, but he seems to be a kind of tough cookie. Okay. When he said out there in Alaska that, look, my legacy, I don't care about my legacy. I got one final chance to make a dent here, and I'm going to do it. So if Barr stays firm, if Durham, who will do whatever Barr tells him to do, gets the goods on these guys, then it's not real hard. We have the goods on these guys too. Then it will really depend on whether Trump chickens out, as I said 3 times already. And I think we're saying the same thing. I always say that the good money is on him chickening out. But this time, I think it might be a little more difficult. This time, there's always a chance that he'll step into it and let Barr to do what he needs to do. And if that happens, these guys are going to be indicted. And what does that mean? That means the country's going to be torn right in the middle because these guys are not going to take it standing down. And their major ally is something called the media, right? Media's on their side. So,
Ray, let me ask something because, I'm not sure if you introduced it or not, but you were a CIA analyst during the first Bush administration. You used to brief George H.W. Bush, correct?
I briefed him when he was vice president under Reagan.
Okay. So I'm not sure. Did you ever have any interactions with Barr on the Hill? Because he'll become the attorney general for that first Bush administration.
Yeah, not with Barr, but with Bush himself. I was working directly under him when he was there for that 1 year, 74, 75. And then, as I say, I started briefing him 81 through 85, together with the other chief national security advisors of the president. The president wanted to sleep in, so he had his minions briefed by the likes of me, and they would come and tell him what he needed to know at 11:30.
It amazes me that Bill Barr doesn't get as much flack as he deserves for one being a horrible human being, but two for his pre-crime division that's starting here in just about a couple of weeks now. And I wanted to talk to you guys about this. It's been incredibly underreported that the Democrats under Nancy Pelosi's leadership just bent over backwards to extend the Patriot provisions of the Patriot Act by 90 days. Uh, and that extension is going to happen through that continuing resolution while the pre-crime, I guess, division or the capabilities, the launch of it takes place. Um, I have long abandoned hope for any kind of resolution through the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Um, but is this profound loss of whatever veneer of civil liberties we had left, is that enough to attract regular people to actually standing up and doing something about it, or maybe coming over here to where we are at the Free Assange Vigil with genuine information, or like Jason's show or my show, about the world that we live in, the way that whistleblowers are treated, and definitely the reality surrounding WikiLeaks and Julian Assange.
Jason, do you want?
I'll let you go, Ray. You go first because I go on for this subject forever.
Well, Nancy Pelosi is corrupt.
Fair assessment there.
Cindy Sheehan and I went to see John Conyers after the Democrats took over. Remember the election they won in 2006? So about July 2007, Cindy had a special relationship with John Conyers. He took some pity on her plight. So she had this in and she said, "Can I take McGovern with me?" And he says, "Who's he?" I said, "Well, so we went." Now, he says, "Well, why are you here?" And Cindy says, "Well, we're hoping that now that you're back in charge of the Judiciary Committee, you'll impeach Bush and Cheney, or at least Bush." I said, "No, we can't do that. Nancy Pelosi, she won't let us do it. So she won't let you do it. John, you're the chair of the committee." He said, "Well, Mr. Intelligence person, there's nothing in the Constitution says John Conyers has to impeach Bush." Well, I said, "Well, why does she not want to do that?" He said, "Well, she says that if we impeach Bush, we won't win as big in the next election." And I said, "So that's the reason not to fulfill your constitutional duty?" And he threw us out. That was the only time after I got arrested, I got arraigned, and I went to trial. Now, I was complaining to my NSA colleagues, my former NSA colleagues from Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, complaining about how transparent and how awful it was that Nancy Pelosi would put winning bigger next time, Obama, before the Constitution. And I said, "Ray, hello, you don't know the half of it." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Nancy Pelosi was briefed on everything. Torture. She's briefed on eavesdropping. She knew all this stuff, and she let it go." So these guys, they go down and brief her, and they go back and they write these little memorandum of conversation, and it's, we showed Nancy what the waterboarding is like, and she's, "Oh, is that okay?" Or so they got the book on her. It's a classic J. Edgar Hoover sort of tactic, and not only would she not have won that's big, but they could have disclosed. They had that holding over her head. So besides that, she's as old as I am, for God's sake. And she's been around a real long time, and she's got these superannuated advisors that don't know up from down. She's alienated the younger Democrats that know which is up and which is down. So Nancy is no one to depend on, and she's what Professor Turley said today is what he said earlier in an op-ed. She didn't know what she's doing. she really doesn't know what she's doing. And the danger, in my view, is that she'll give 4 more years to Trump. And just to make clear, I serve the Constitution first and foremost. I don't like Trump. I have no truck with Trump. I think he's the worst president the United States ever had. But I'll defend. Uh, I'll expose the chicanery that's going around with Russiagate and all this kind of stuff. He was duly elected. He's not going to be impeached, I hope, or at least removed from office on these phony grounds, which are mostly political and really won't bear the light of day. All they'll do, ironically enough, is destroy Joe Biden's chance to become the nominee, because, as I said on many occasions, there's so much dirt out there on Joe Biden and son Hunter that I wonder what extra dirt the president was trying to find out from the Ukrainians. It's all out there. Joe's on the YouTube there at the Council for Foreign Relations talking about doing precisely what they're accusing others of having done. So it's a very sorry tale. I don't know what you do about somebody like Pelosi, and I'm glad that I'm not professing to be an expert on domestic politics.
Let me jump in here, right? Because you had so much good stuff to say. First of all, talking about Cindy Sheehan and all the way back in the day, meeting with John Conyers, that's when there was an anti-war movement on the left.
Yeah.
There doesn't happen to be one anymore at all on either side of the aisle. There is no anti-war movement. That should scare the shit out of people, number one. So the idea that somehow we're going to be able to ignite this issue under the Patriot Act for people to pay attention again, I just don't see it happening. I mean, the irony is you have a public that, has these magic devices that are locked biometrically or with your face scan or with a code because they don't want the loved ones around them to have access to their photographs or their information, but they're fully comfortable that they live in a track trace database society since really the late 80s into the 90s through Promise and Carnivore and what was exposed through Hepting versus AT&T, those what were those systems? The Norris Insight systems that were basically the server rooms that were put in AT&T and all the large communication companies. And it's only grown, right? Today I did a story on the fact that the iPhone 11, no matter what you do, what settings you have, it pings your location, it sends that data out there with all the other metadata that is tracking, tracing, and databasing you. We just introduced within the last year this new program in a lot of the airports for your facial recognition scan to allow you to cut the line and go through quicker. Well, now, guess what? Homeland Security has announced they want to do it for everybody that's traveling across the country into another country. And soon it will be for domestic travel. And all of this is being put into place no matter what administration is there, that permanent state that we talk about. And there is no uproar. And I think that they've been really effective in using the media not only to make us docile about these issues, war included. I mean, you look at that Syria thing, I just can't believe it. We're not talking about Syria. We're not talking about Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, all these places we're currently involved in. Forget about Yemen and possibly Iran now, talking about none of that. But we are talking about kicking people off of YouTube and criminalizing certain parts of speech. It's a nightmare for people like myself that are awake, and it's a wet dream for the predator class that is currently controlling the strings behind the scenes. That is that permanent state. So my question to you, Ray, is how do we get, we used to have an anti-war movement, man. People used to get in the streets. I haven't seen one in about a decade in this country. They neutralized that Obama on. He was a much more likable and well-spoken than a guy that said, fool me once, fool me again. I don't know what I'm talking about. And Darth Cheney. It was evil. It was easy to kind of go after those. How do we reignite at least what we had back then with the Cindy Sheehans of the world?
Well, that's the question, Jason.
So I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. Real quick, we have before you answer that question, we do have people in our chat asking us about super chats and about supporting us financially. We, ActionForAssange, we do not take donations. We encourage everybody to donate to WikiLeaks to help Julian Assange and also to donate to Chelsea Manning. However, we are actually planning to cover the full extradition hearing in February Steve and myself, I'm Taylor, we intend on going to London to cover that hearing because we know, of course, that the mainstream media will not cover it fairly or accurately. We are very well versed on Julian's case, of course, and want to bring you all the facts, and we'll live stream and we'll be providing you with factual information and working with other activists who are also in England and covering the case. Also, the other two co-hosts here, Christy Doth and Andrew Smith, intend on going to DC to hold meaningful, peaceful protests there at the same time while this full extradition hearing is taking place. We do need some funding to get us there. It is an expensive trip. So if you do want to help us financially, that is one way to do so. We are extremely grateful and thankful for anybody who is willing to donate to us to make this happen. It's really important that factual information be provided throughout this entire full extradition hearing. So if you do want to help us financially, that is a great way to do so. And I believe one of my co-hosts will absolutely put that GoFundMe in the chat right now. So I just wanted to make note of that. And then also, if you are new here right now, please do subscribe to our channel, Action4Assange. Please follow us on Twitter at Action_4Assange.
So one of the things I kind of want to touch on, because it's a really reoccurring topic about what we can do as far as this situation goes with Julian Assange, with the intelligence communities, with the permanent deep state. And getting an anti-war movement started again is one of the things we can do to push back against it. And that's kind of the hope of actually going to DC. The thing we like to promote here more than anything on the Free Assange visuals is this idea of decentralized activism, that you don't have to go to big protests or big rallies, that you just have to be the protest or the rally in your town. And it comes down to doing what you can with what you have and the time and money that you have to do it. And we're really hoping that by getting to DC, we can unite a bunch of different activist groups, a bunch of people in common struggles, from anything from the Fourth Amendment protections that are against the Fourth Amendment protections in the Constitution that build the foundation for women's right to choose what to do with their own bodies and the right to an abortion, all the way down to using that as a way to prevent intelligence communities from spying on everyday people. And one of the big things right now that we can do to really help is the fight against the Patriot Act, because with this like essentially 3-month window that we have right now, it's more or less a way that we can push back and actually try to get substantial change in society, because the Patriot Act is one of those things that allows ICE to exist. It's one of the things that allows the TSA to exist and so many other institutions that we want to see ended, and then also prevents the anonymous data collection and all of these other things that are literally allowing intelligence communities to manipulate our society. So I guess for Ray and Jason, what do you think are some ways that like a normal, average, everyday person could help push back to free Julian or to help end the Patriot Act?
Well, before I hopefully get Ray to answer the same question, basically, how do we bring back activism? I want to point out that even, you talk about decentralization, right? And without having big groups of people and protests. Well, Ray's done it, man. It's asking these guys on camera, and it's shameful that back in, between 2004, say, and 2010, there were a lot more people with a handy cam asking powerful people real questions about the war in Iraq, no weapons of mass destruction, the intelligence community, 9/11, the Saudis, all those things. And now everybody has this thing that can not only do it, but stream it live. And what are they worried about? Well, it's cool to trigger a leftist, somebody who's making 40 grand a year just like you are, and getting them freaking out on camera. It's the low-hanging fruit. We need people going back for that high-hanging fruit, asking the Brennans, the Clappers, the Bill Barrs, the tough questions about our civil liberties and these wars overseas, asking people like Anderson Cooper how we can keep propagating war in the Middle East and Syria and making people like Tulsi Gabbard bow down and say, well, you met with a dictator, right? He's an evil dictator, that Assad. Say it now, instead of exposing what really had in Duma. So I think individuals have more power than they could ever imagine with this little box. Instead of worrying about Snapchat or your Instagram, start going to these events and putting people on the spot, just like the DNC. You look at these candidates, how many of them are stepping up to the plate for Assange? None of them but Tulsi Gabbard. Even Bernie Sanders can't give a straight answer about what he would do with Assange.
So what happened is that we monetized thought, and the platforms that allowed us to make money off of our thought incentivized self-censorship, incentivized covering the horse race, as opposed to talking about what's necessary and talking about the larger context of what's going on in the world, what global intelligence is and does. And then if you stick your neck out to do that, you are deplatformed, you lose your ability to create content through this channel or that channel. There's a potential YouTube apocalypse happening December 10th, where channels that are deemed not commercially viable will be nuked off of the platform. Jason, before the power went out on my show on Sunday, I mean, we were talking about that. My show is not quote unquote commercially viable to Raytheon or Boeing, but it's, I believe, necessary. I wouldn't be doing it. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about the impending, I guess the way that monetized thought was incentivized through self-censorship, I guess is where I wanted to go with that.
Yeah, I think, we need to expose these people. Little vignette, not very long. When I challenged Rumsfeld in Atlanta and had my little 4-minute debate with him about why he lied about Iraq, as I was coming out, I got a call, Anderson Cooper on the phone. Oh, Mr. McGovern, causing quite a stir down here in Atlanta. I'd like to have you on my show, but first, I need to ask you a question. How do I say this? Weren't you afraid? So I was pretty much in shock myself, so I said, that's a normal question. No, I wasn't really afraid. I briefed secretaries of defense for many. And then I said, wait a second. Anderson Cooper, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune, pretty boy, he's asking me, wasn't I? And so I said, well, here's my chance. Anderson, let me be really candid with you. It was a real high. It was a good feeling. I had done my homework. I had some really tough questions to ask this guy. And I asked him, and he lied. Just, hey, you want to consider trying that sometime, Anderson? Do you have homework? Well, that's very well and good. Well, I'll have my people get in touch with your people. I said, no, don't do that, Anderson. I said, I don't have any people. Just call me back. So now these guys have to be exposed. Now, how do you do that? Well, there are lots of young people with good ideas. Where does he live? Where do these captains of industry live? I was at Columbia School of Journalism about 3 years ago. We were talking about various justice issues, and it came out the head of Westinghouse lives just an hour away in some fancy community in New Jersey. Now, I looked around, all these young people. Well, I finally got up and said, 40 years ago, there'd be a group in the back here figuring out how to hire the next bus to get out to Morristown, New Jersey, to confront this guy. He's making these, special gyroscopes for drones and all kinds of stuff. So what we need to do is energize these people. And I think one way we do it is by not letting them off easy. The other thing I'll say is, that's another little story, but after Ed Snowden got all this information out, that they were listening to it all. They were collecting it all. I mean, I said to Bill Binney from NSA, I said, come on, Bill. All emails, all telephone calls, come on, you can't. Just, Ray, believe me, they can and they do. So we went and talked to Wolfgang Schmidt. Now, Wolfgang Schmidt used to work in the Stasi. Those of you who know what the Stasi is, it was the East German secret police. They were second to none in brutality. And if you saw that Das Leben der Anderen, the Lives of Others, Academy Award winner about 12 years ago, you could see what it was like. It's a great film. Okay, so we asked Wolfgang, who used to work there, Wolfgang, the Americans all say, I don't care. I have nothing to fear. I haven't done anything wrong. I don't care if they're going to catch a terrorist and they look into my night. What do you say to that, Wolfgang? And he says, I say this. This is incredibly naive. The reason they collect this information is to use it against you. You don't get to decide whether it's used against you. The only way to prevent this from being used against you is to prevent it from being collected in the first place. it was perfect, you know? He knew what it was like, and he knew the only way you can stop this stuff is to prevent it from being collected in the first place. So I'll go back to Jason and figure, how are we going to do this Patriot Act? Do this stuff. Well, we have to kind of be a little more imaginative than we've been up till now.
Real quick, I do want to just have one point before Jason responds, and then we'll let him respond. We have some comments again about Bernie Sanders and his not answering the question about Julian Assange and how he doesn't owe us or anybody an explanation. That is absolutely false. He owes everybody an explanation as to what he will do to help free Julian Assange if he chooses to do so. Remember, he's an elected official. He is working for us, not the other way around. He has to be answering these questions. It's his obligation. That's part of the job when you're in the media and when you're a politician specifically, you have to answer questions from the media. So I disagree with those in the chat, particularly Niall Flanagan, once again, who is saying that Bernie Sanders doesn't owe us an answer. He absolutely does. Why aren't you on the side of the people?
It gets really frustrating to hear people in the chat say that Bernie Sanders supports Assange. Bernie Sanders has never spoken publicly out on the persecution of Julian Assange. So I think, just to clear the air here, there is no misinterpretation. The man has not spoken out in support of Assange. So I would like that to get addressed and to maybe finally to just stop that issue that keeps going on. While I have the moment, I want to ask Ray, if Julian is brought here, if he is extradited here, what will happen to him? What will the intelligence agencies do to him behind closed doors that the public will not know about? From your perspective, please.
All I can say, Christy, is expect the worst. Look what they did to Chelsea, Bradley Manning. They'll put him away, and we'll never see him again. They're merciless, and the stakes are very high as they see them. The cowardly media knows how high the stakes are, but they've been so bought and sold that they're not doing their job in defending him. So it's up to us, really. And I'm just delighted to be part of this group to figure out how we might be a little bit more effective. Now, there's no hope for Julian to be treated in a fair way if he gets to the United States. That's why I think it's really essential for us to redouble our efforts right now, like this week, before the election in London, to make sure that a close eye is kept on how they're treating him, because I fear the worst this week. That's my fear.
Well, I got to agree with Ray, because I don't think they want him to come over here. You know, you got to realize we got until February until the next court hearing is on this extradition. If they can play this out another 3 to 6 months with what we know, I think it's pretty clear he could be dead. I mean, when he's already lost so much focus, he can barely speak his name and his age, when he's not allowed to see his lawyers, when the reports are that he's under 23-hour solitary confinement. None of these are good things. And, you know, when you look at this deep state apparatus, another reason I'm very apprehensive about Bill Barr, when you couldn't keep a guy like Epstein alive, and now we have even more information coming out from his brother that the first suicide attempt was not a suicide attempt. He's saying that his brother told him he was, in fact, attacked by his cellmate, Nicholas Tartiglione, who is in for quadruple murder. He's about to go up for quadruple murder. He's a corrupt police officer. He was dealing drugs. And lo and behold, just before Epstein got there, he had smuggled in what was known as a miniature cell phone. A year before the Epstein deal, he also was in a physical altercation there. So the guy's not a great guy. And if he told people, again, that he didn't try to commit suicide, he was attacked, why was he on suicide watch in the first place? Why are there no cameras? So if we can't keep a guy like that alive, I don't have a lot of hope that you bring a guy like Assange here, even if you're trying to make an example of him, in the fear that he's going to speak out and get even the slightest bit of positive media coverage, because there still is enough people that are not asleep enough to go along with the talking point that Assange is a cyber terrorist. And those are the same people that are supporting Tulsi Gabbard and her campaign. And to kind of, circle back to Bernie Sanders himself, Bernie Sanders won the 2016 DNC, like he won, and he didn't stand up for himself. So that should let you know everything you need to know about Bernie Sanders. If you can't stand up for yourself when you win trying to go for that big office, you're not really going to stand up for anybody or anything other than what you're allowed to. I mean, you're compromised, period, amen.
If Bernie Sanders won't stand up to the DNC, how is he going to stand up for Julian Assange?
That's right.
How is he going to stand up to the deep state, the military industrial complex, the DOJ, how many different intelligence agencies? When, how, and where is he going to do that? He couldn't even stand up to his own party. Like, nobody seems to explain that, except there's some 4D chess that magically will change when Bernie Sanders is president.
You have to
There are
trust the
secret
plan.
indictments. There are secret indictments. We're going to get them all. We're going to bring them in. Assange will be pardoned by Lord Trump. Everything's fine. Everything's fine.
I didn't even know that was your voice. I was like, who is that? Also, we do have someone in the chat who is asking us questions about decisions that Julian's attorneys may make. None of us are trained attorneys. None of us have legal, well, I have somewhat of a legal background, but I'm not an attorney. None of us are a part of Julian Assange's legal team, so we cannot speak to the actions that his lawyers may or may not take. So that is why we're not answering that question, and I'll hand it over to whoever wants to pick up from here.
Yeah, we would love to interview and talk to one of his lawyers. That's something we've been working on, but until then, we cannot speak for them. We cannot, even if we did know, that wouldn't really be appropriate for us to divulge his legal team's impending plans. That's just not for us to speak to. If it's public
you gotta
news,
ask
of course
a
we will
Spanish
speak to it.
security firm if you want to know what Julian and his lawyers are talking about.
Exactly.
Or you could ask the CIA that they live streamed those meetings to. But we're not going to. We're not able to speak to that because we're not spying on the guy.
There is, there is one ray of hope, and it's a big one. Nils Melzer, the UN rapporteur for torture, his op-ed a half year ago was very moving as he went through how he probed this and probed that and talked to people who knew Julian and changed his mind completely. And as he put it, realized all of a sudden that he himself, Melzer, had been the victim of a massive propaganda campaign defaming Julian. Okay, he's the UN rapporteur for torture still. We have the UN twice ruling officially and very formally against preventive detention, or what do they call it? The detention that's unjustified under the law. So, what do we do? Where does Melzer live? He's Swiss, but I don't think he lives in Switzerland. He's probably in New York. Well, why don't we get to him and say, look, it's really nice op-ed. It's too bad you couldn't get it published anywhere, but it's out there. Now, what are you just going to write an op-ed, or are you going to do something else? And we'll come with you if you want to do something else. We've got to think in new terms here. We got to build a bit forward because the time is short for us to save Julian.
So the thing I realized super early on is that the censorship against us is hyper extreme. We're more or less trapped in a bubble of a couple, probably 10 to 60,000 people, somewhere in that vicinity, depending on the post, that actually see, talk, and interact with each other about this topic on a given basis. So what I decided, because I went to DC the Friday after Julian got detained, I drove out there. And it was just a big time of reflection for me almost. And it was about how we can actually reach people where they are. And that's the whole point of local action. And to me, it was postering. It was hand making posters, taking pictures of them with cam scanner, turning them into PDFs, and then mass printing them and hanging them up. It's something Taylor and I do. We go around, we pass them out at different events, like we've done Joe Rogan events, we've done Jimmy Dore events, and getting out and actually putting signs up in your community with a message as simple as jail war criminals, free Julian Assange, journalism isn't criminal. Simple, direct topics like that on public facilities, such as like telephone poles or park benches and things like that, have a way of breaking the censorship, because you're not reaching people based on interest group, you're reaching people based on geolocation. So it almost turns your social media posts and topics and ideas into something that the people in your community directly around you see and interact with, and breaks the monotony of daily life when they drive down the street and see jail war criminals, free Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning is a POW. That's something that sticks out, and it's something that the police actually respond pretty quickly to try to take down and to stop you from doing. But it really points back to like the early days of 9/11 organizing, where you had people that would go around and pass out DVDs and would pick up the megaphones at Walmart and say 9/11 was an inside job and shit like that. And we really need to get back to a culture of telling each other the truth. And I think Christmas is probably the best time to talk about it, because we as a society have this issue with collective lying. And it happens from when we're a kid to when we're a grown up. And like there comes a time now where you have a talk about Christmas with your kids, you have a talk about sex, and then you're going to have a talk about 9/11 to tell them what the fuck is actually going on in the world. And I think that trying to get people to speak honestly to each other in their local communities and going to community events is like one of the biggest things we can do to build pressure. So I was just wondering what you guys thought, or maybe could recommend to people to do to try to get involved with that locally.
Well, Andrew, I couldn't agree more. Like that was the time for me. Is and not only that, I mean, even back in the day, Mark Dice was taking USB sticks and going into Best Buys, and he was loading up documentary films on screens for televisions and monitors. Like my film Fabled Enemies, he did that. Now, to circle that kind of back around what you were talking about with 9/11 itself. Listen, I was watching YouTube last night, and you don't think that matters? What was the thing I had to watch? Bloomberg's new ad starts with, I kid you not, 9/11. Says nothing about it, moves on to the next topic. It's now a talking point because he's the mayor in New York City during 9/11. He should be the president of the United States. And quite frankly, with how terrible the playing field is up there and people dropping out like Kamala Harris and them trying to push Grandma Oatmeal as the front runner, nobody's fucking voting for Elizabeth Warren. I promise you that. By golly, we can do it. No one wants that woman. I promise you. Joe Biden is talking about his hairy legs. He's senile. He's as corrupt as McGovern says. And you want to talk about 9/11? At any moment, somebody can pull the card that on the week of 9/11, he met with one of the financiers of the hijackers, Mohammed Atta in particular, General Mahmoud Ahmed, a man who was also connected to the murder of Daniel Pearl. He got up before the Senate floor and he said, yeah, Pakistan in particular, they pretend to be our friends, but they better change their act. And what happens later? Well, it comes out on September 10th, he was being protected by the Pakistani military in a Pakistani hospital. And where do they supposedly find him? Abbottabad, Pakistan. Okay. So I would say that policy failed, Joe. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's a clown show up there. And just pointing out those facts that I did, that I ripped off in 3 minutes through, on the ground activism, through, breaking your phone out, man. I remember when I had my first phone that was a flip phone that did video. I loaded up a 15-second video on World Trade Center Building 7 and just showed people San Francisco, the original Tea Party. Before the Tea Party was a thing, we were throwing the 9/11 Commission that was 9 foot tall into the San Francisco Bay because it wasn't about right and left. It was about right and wrong. And I think it's about becoming human again. Unfortunately, as social media has progressed, people are more comfortable with dancing on TikTok for 90 seconds. I mean, taking a half an hour to an hour out of your day to get the perfect TikTok, don't get me wrong, and not communicating it with anybody but thumbs up and likes, than going up to somebody and having a conversation for 10 or 15 minutes that might change the way they think. That's the big problem, man. We're detached from each other. How many people had a serious conversation about geopolitics that went beyond this false left-right paradigm at Turkey Day? How many people did it? How many people do it on a daily basis? How many people are intimidated that they might not be accepted in their social group or their work group for even displaying these type of politics and not treating it like team fucking baseball? So it's got to be a revelation of the mind, man. And I think it's that on the ground stuff with that shock moment from a video, a conversation, a document showing them, you know, Joe Biden sitting next to Richard Haass, one of these permanent state guys that's been the president of the Council for Foreign Relations for how long, bragging about withholding $1 billion fucking dollars unless within 6 hours when he gets on a plane, they don't fire the prosecutor. He's Joey fucking B. That's as gangster as it gets. Seriously, who gets to withhold $1 billion? And that's not the story. That's not the corruption. I mean, dude, sometimes you got to get fired up. Sometimes I get a little aggressive. And that's the thing, man. There's no passion left. I'm not a madman. Everything I just said is absolute fact. And that guy is running for fucking president of the United States with pictures of him biting down on his wife's finger because he's so senile at this point. That's the establishment guy. Come on.
Or the new video that came out. We're going to talk about that later, though. But
so the sentence, though, because there's literally one sentence you can say to inform anyone about Julian. And Julian Assange is the publisher of WikiLeaks, who exposed U.S. war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, and is now facing 175 years in prison for doing so if he gets extradited to the United States. So it takes that one sentence. And if the people are mildly informed about anything that's happened within the last 25 years, you instantly get them on your side.
Let me say this, and let's up that to a minute of their time. You whip your phone out and you show them the C-130 footage of the journalist getting gunned down. That was one of the things that he published via Bradley, aka Chelsea Manning, and say, oh, this is why they want to put us there, because he's exposing how we're blowing them up. Oh, by the way, in Abu Ghraib, they were also raping and torturing children. That also got exposed through those documents in Seymour Hersh. Might want to check them out. Maybe.
I noticed when you bring that stuff up to people, there's never really a response. There's never really a counter to that.
Here's collateral murder.
They don't have anything to say to that because it's so fucking terrible.
Or the answer is, what are you gonna do? So
what
are we gonna do, Ray? Like, what is something we could do every day or once a week that could push back on a local level against this?
I don't know, that's a tough one. I think you're on the right track when you talk about local stuff. It does have to start locally. And, you know, it's just a matter of educating people. And maybe with all this stuff that's going on in Congress, people will be so disgusted that they'll turn their attention to things of more moment, the kinds of things we've been talking about. But it's an uphill slog, and I think that young people need to realize that you know, it used to be not so bad, and unless they if they take more direct action, it's going to get still worse. I wish I could be more optimistic, but you do have some real leadership now on the environmental issues. They're the ones that transcend everything else, global warming. We have 9 grandchildren. Now, think about that. When my youngest grandchild is my age, is she going to have clean water to drink, clean air to breathe? Chances are no. What kind of society are we that we can permit that to happen? So,
we'll be the only country in the world that drives ourselves to the poorhouse.
Yeah, and you know, this is the winter of our discontent. I would say that Tom Paine had it right. Didn't look real good for those guys in Pennsylvania, Valley Forge, and all those places. But he wrote, "The pen can be mightier than the sword," and I just would warn against becoming discouraged, because There's a big difference between being disgusted and discouraged. Discouragement is not allowed. Being disgusted, that's an action word. That prompts a response. We just have to figure out what the appropriate response is for each of us.
So, do we want to touch on some other topics with our guests, or how do we want to go about this? Please also, if you're in the chat right now and you have questions for Jason or Ray, please leave it in the chat and we will pick up on some of those questions and ask them before they do head out.
How much time do you have with us this evening, Ray?
Well, let's see. I could stay another half hour if I'd be useful, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation as I tend to do.
No, we are really happy to have you here. Absolutely stick with us. So I'll direct the conversation to my co-host. And again, if you are, before we do that though, if you are in the chat and you're new to our channel, we are ActionForAssange. Do subscribe to our channel. Do like this video, share it widely on social media. We know that these conversations are not happening anywhere in the mainstream media, and they're happening very seldom even within independent media. Now, I'm going to have to excuse Jason. I'm not including him on that, of course, because he does talk about these issues and talks about a lot of things that are not being covered. So that's not Jason. But in general, we do tend to talk about things that are not covered, not given much attention. So do share this widely, subscribe to our channel. And also, if you do want to help us financially, we really don't accept, well, we don't at all accept any money. We encourage everybody to donate to Julian's Defense Fund and also Chelsea Manning's Defense Fund. But if you do want to have accurate coverage and be exposed to the truth during that extradition hearing, you can donate to our GoFundMe link, which is in the chat, and that's very much appreciated. Once again, do leave questions for us in the chat for our guests. And yeah, so I will hand it over to my co-host to continue with the discussion. And thank you everybody for watching.
Do we want to move on to the letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury?
I was wondering if I could get a question in for Ray. Now that I have him and I haven't talked to him in almost a decade. Because, you know, Ray, we're talking about Assange, right? And you saw the aggression really come from the deep state. What? After the DNC emails, after them tweeting things out, such as, you know, look for child trafficking evidence in this. They tweeted out that FBI document. Currently, we have that lawsuit where supposedly Andrew McCabe is Seymour Hersh's FBI source from that leaked phone call, where he claims that, you know, Seth Rich is the leaker, that he and Aaron sold this to Assange through a eBay transaction and having a Dropbox set up. What do you make of all that? I mean, is that a lot of legitimate information? You think there's some disinformation mixed there? Hersh, in the twilight of his life and career, has remained pretty silent on it. You know, there's rumblings that he did a story on Rich and nobody would publish it. What are your thoughts?
I have the greatest admiration for Cy Hersh. He is fastidious about protecting his sources. He made that terrible mistake talking to that one fellow, what's his name, Butowski, I guess. And clearly he regretted that. But he's not going to do anything or say anything that will endanger that source. Now, I was hoping maybe, with all due respect, that source would die, or source would, you know, would just kind of disappear or something, and so I could tell the rest of the story. With respect to the Riches, well, you know, Kim.com also has some information on that. It looks very, very likely that what has been come to light is that it's not such a nice story, that the Riches said, yeah, we'll give you information, but you know, we're like to have some money for that. Now, if that's the case, and I don't know if it is, but if that's the case, Aaron Rich, the brother, the surviving brother, is playing a full court press to divert attention from it. I got a subpoena today.
Oh,
First subpoena ever. Served district court in Washington, served here where I live. And it has to do with what veteran intelligence professionals for sanity and I personally have written about the fact, it's not speculation, the fact that there was no Russian hack of the DNC, but that it was an inside job. Now, the forensics that we have, due to the fact that we're blessed by two, not one, but two former technical directors of the NSA and other volunteer forensic investigators, show that it had to be a thumb drive download with physical access to the DNC computer or server. Okay. Not only that, but before WikiLeaks published this, it had been saved to a storage device like a thumb drive. How do we know that? Well, I could tell you it would take me 3 minutes. It would take Bill Binney 4 minutes, but it has to do with how the thing was saved. It had nothing to do with the internet. It had to do with how this thing was stored. It was stored in such a way that it was only a physical, a thumb drive. Okay, now, where does that leave us? Well, what happened to the computer? Where's the computer? You know, oh, there's a whole bunch of mysteries here. And Butowski was overly clever, I guess, but he certainly elicited some stuff from Cy Hirsch. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a neuralgic reaction anytime you say Seth Rich. It's like, oh, conspiracy theorist, conspiracy theorist, conspiracy theorist. Well, why? I mean, what we know about him is that he was disgruntled. He was working at DNC after having worked real hard for Bernie, right? And who was it? The head of the DNC that took the place of Wasserman Schultz. Anyhow, she devoted her book to him.
yes. Was it Rice? Was it Susan
Donna
Rice?
Brazil. Donna Brazil
Donna
devoted
Brazil,
her
that's it.
book
Yeah.
to Seth Rich live on Tim Black's show in 2016.
Yeah. So now, so you put all this stuff together, and you've got to say, you know, there's a con game going on here. It's a con game that was given real life when John Kennedy was assassinated. Because, as most of us know, the CIA had a role in that, a big role. And Allen Dulles, who had been the head of the CIA and was cashiered by Kennedy months before, somehow he weaseled his way onto the Warren Commission and became pretty much the director of the whole commission. Now, people thought that was a little odd at the time. I mean, the CIA was suspected initially. And guess what Allen Dulles said? Conspiracy theorist, conspiracy theorist. And that has stuck from that day. Any question of JFK story, the official story, conspiracy theorist. And it works right down to this day. Seth Rich, murdered. Well, was it because he knew too much? Or I don't know. But we have enough circumstantial evidence, including from Craig Murray, the ambassador, former ambassador to Uzbekistan from the UK, who know enough about this to say, no, it wasn't a hack. We know some of the people involved. And it's going to be interesting because this subpoena that I got today, it's the weirdest thing. They're asking me for publicly available information and they're identifying it. I feel like saying, hey, you got a live link there, download it for yourself, damn it, you know? But they're also asking me for any other information I have about the riches, about the hacking and all that kind of stuff. They've asked Bill Binney for the same thing. This is sort of like playing, you know, the best defense is a good offense. And that's what I see Seth Rich's brother doing, trying to make sure that everyone is sued, everyone is preoccupied with what they wrote about this. And I don't think it's going to turn out too well once some of this stuff gets finished, the impeachment, all that kind of stuff. I think probably we'll see that there was more to the story and that Kim.com, who talked with Seth Rich, who emailed exchanged at least, was may have had a larger share of the truth than anybody else.
I want to just jump in here for two reasons. Number one, if you believe that phone call and McCabe being the source or whoever the source was, there is an FBI file. They were called in after the Seth Rich murder, and they did confiscate a computer. And like you said, the USB stick, it'd be easy on the metadata to figure out how that information was downloaded. A guy like me, who you can right click it in 2 minutes, you can figure out how to do it. It's basic stuff. What I do find interesting is in the Mueller report, they mentioned Seth Rich on like a page and a half. And what do they say? They say that Julian Assange was spreading conspiracy theories, that good old intelligence community that split that report up into two things, Russia collusion and then obstruction of justice, because really it was a perjury trap for Trump. It worked on Manafort and ended up working on Stone, but he never took the stand. They weren't able to get him on some other side thing, so they couldn't bring him in, but they still wanted to kind of disgrace the story that it could possibly be Seth Rich and that it was absolutely Russia. And now just this week, you were just mentioning that. Again, look at the headline on this. Will Julian Assange and WikiLeaks finally tell the truth about Seth Rich? And it's a smear piece all about how they put this conspiracy theory together, in order to get Trump elected on behalf of the Russians. The spin has no end, Ray. And when you're battling the Rolling Stone, a rock and roll magazine, where infotainment has been the culture now for 30 plus years, essentially, I don't know if I have the answers other than those, local activist moves, talking to people, creating media. And by the way, that's a bombshell you dropped on this show. Ray, I need to get your email and have you on my show for 15 minutes to talk about that subpoena. Please do it. But what will you give them? I mean, like you just said, everything you've covered on your site is already open source. So what are they asking for? More open source material, or you to testify about said open source material?
They don't want me to mention Aaron Rich in anything I write. And my publisher, I write for consortiumnews.com first and foremost. He's been very sensitive to that. He said, why stick our necks out? If we're going to get sued, better just to say Seth's brother or something like that, But, it's really, when I look at people like places like Mother Jones must be rolling around in her grave, for God's sake.
Absolutely.
Rolling Stone and Jane Mayer and the New Yorker, for God's sake, and James Risen and the whatever it is, all these people. Have they all drunk the Kool-Aid, or are they all so corrupt that, or maybe they believe John Brennan? I mean, could they be so naive? I mean, I think that there's a good chance Adam Schiff believed John Brennan, and that's why he thought he could, proceed the way he's doing. So it's confusing, but I think the important thing is not to expect immediate results. Now, it's been a long time. We've been slogging around for a long time. But, I have Stone said, we're going to lose for a while. And then we're going to lose another one. Then we'll lose another time. But one day, we're going to win, because people who are after the truth are going to be enough to swing things around. Now, we may not be around to see that. I might not be around to see that, but some people will. So we have to keep slogging around and not expect immediate success. Dan Berrigan, the Jesuit who was so prominent in protesting Vietnam, he was a good friend. And what he used to say is, look, what Americans expect is immediate success. It's not about success. It's about being faithful. It's about keeping your eye on the ball and not being diverted by the lack of apparent success, because the good is worth doing because it's good. And we may not see the final results here, but one of the side effects is I'm looking at all you guys, And some of you are, I think maybe all of you are younger than I am, okay? And I'm saying, my God, isn't this good? Isn't this good? Just look around us. There's enough reason for encouragement just to look at ourselves and the comradeship that comes of striving for justice.
Yeah, Jason and I are I believe we're the two oldest people on the vigil this evening. I think I've got everyone beat at 41. Um, but no, it's heartening just to know that the a couple hundred of us worldwide that are doing this. And when Alex Hills does her Candles for Assange events and they go global and people all over the planet take part in it, it is definitely, it makes you, I guess, feel better about uh the world around you, because this is dark material that we go through on a weekly basis here. And I know on my show I spend a lot of time um, on issues that most people don't touch. Jason does the same thing on his program. Uh, it, but we're out here in the wilderness, with no one but each other to turn to more often than not. So it's important, I think, that people who are in, I guess, the truth community, um reach out to each other, stay in touch with each other, and then support each other's work. I make a point to go to the documents or the independent media that is covering any given situation. I don't want to give time to mainstream media on my show, and go to great lengths to avoid that. And Consortium News is one of those outlets that I find, uh, you know, more and more, I guess, over and over from the time I started, using as source material for the show. And a lot of that has had your byline on it. So yeah, it's man, I'm gonna fangirl here for a second on air, but it is really an honor to have you on tonight. I really
Yeah, I want to build off of what you were saying too, Steve, and then we'll bring our guests back in here. It's really important for everybody to unite and work together because, of course, as Steve was saying, there's only a few hundred people probably around the world who are outspoken about their beliefs that really kind of coincide with ours. Another important point to remember, though, to everybody is it's also really imperative that people rally behind those who are already taking up the fight. And that goes out, that especially is what's happening with Susie Dawson in her One versus Five Eye campaign. I talk about it on this vigil very frequently. I was just on Jason Burma's show talking about it. Susie has already been very much impacted by some very, very powerful entities because of the value and because of the quality of her work exposing these very agencies. So before we wait until we are directly impacted by surveillance, by spying, and targeting for our work and our activism, it's really important to stand behind somebody who is already taking up that fight. And Susie Dawson is doing that through her One versus Five Eye campaign. So to everybody who is new here and everybody who is, watching every week, please follow the campaign on Twitter at the number 1, the letters VS, the number 5, the letter I, and do you can find more information at oneversus5eye.com. And another great way to also help her out is to donate if you can at oneversus5eye.com/donate. Susie's an incredible journalist. We need her work. We need to rally behind her. And also Ray too, I was just speaking with her earlier. Before I forget, I wanted to let you know that Susie wanted me to tell you that she says hi and that she loves you. And those are her words.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Return the compliment, please.
I will. Absolutely. So anybody, if you have questions for our guests, please leave them in the chat. Do let us know if there are things you want us to ask our guests this evening. It's been a really interesting and important conversation that we've all been having. And it's been really cool to see Jason and Ray interact with one another and really add a unique perspective to our vigils. So my co-host, if you guys have questions or any other topics you want to touch on.
So Ray talked about it a little bit earlier. What are some ways do you think that people in the UK as well as people in the US can help influence what's happening in the UK right now politically? Like whether it's getting people to vote for candidates that are pro-Assange, or maybe just getting the court system to do something better with Assange's case. Like, what do you think are ways people can get involved? Anybody?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that was for everybody. I mean, I don't really know much about the UK, man. I know that they voted on Brexit and they couldn't get that done. So that's not encouraging. I mean, it's tough because you do see uprisings of people like let's talk about Occupy Wall Street, right? Occupy Wall Street seemed to be like this really great organic movement, people talking. But then what did it get monikered as? The 1%. Well, I got news for you. The 1% isn't hurting everybody. How many people graduated with a few hundred? Are you telling me there were 3 amongst the 1%? You know, we're talking about the 0.0001% and their minions. You know, the cartel out there, the mid-level people like the Clintons, you know, they're just mid-level. They're minions of somebody else, I promise you. And the people up there for running for president, you know, they're spokespeople for the predator class. And to me, I don't know how much we can change until we go back to, like, I'm not a revolutionary. I'm a big constitutionalist, but a restoration of that Constitution and Bill of Rights. I mean, essentially, it's been eviscerated. And by the way, I think it's kind of ironic. A guy like Roger Stone, who started what I think really hurt our Constitution and Bill of Rights, started lobbying into the industry it is today. Lobbyists shouldn't exist. Not when they can just give money to whoever they want and give jobs to people that serve a 4 or 6 year term that's 7 or 8 figures in some cases. That's complete insanity. I mean, but that's the system and how it works. And Stone ended up erecting that. And instead of going to prison for those criminal actions, which are criminal, by the way, no, he goes to lying. He goes there for lying to Congress, essentially minions of the same system he helped to erect, right? Because they're only doing it for the lobbying and to make it look good. So I don't know, man. I think it's just so tough. We're in a situation where we're so far away from what the founders had in mind. And I know a lot of people don't want to talk about the founders. They're these racist, rich, white landowners, but they were smart enough to put things in the Constitution that they could be amended. Unfortunately, you know, we didn't amend the Constitution to have lobbyists. No, we allowed an out of control surveillance state, a military industrial complex that we were warned about by Eisenhower, to basically form and erect itself and strengthen itself over the decades. So how do we stop that? How do we combat that beyond free speech? That's a great question.
The era that I really hope I can point the steering wheel of human society towards, or at least American societies, entering into like a second American Reconstruction, essentially, where we can find ways to just put the divisiveness behind us and just rebuild our country for everybody.
So do we want to address one of our questions from our viewers right now? This is to Ray and to Jason. This is from Propaganda, our friend Quinn. Hi, Quinn. He's been watching us since day one. He wants to know, can Jason and Ray talk about theories about what demographic Vault 7 is used on and what programs could be used on presidential candidates?
Well, before Ray goes, and again, I want to thank Ray for even being here. They're using it on all demographics. let me say this right now. Every single Bill Binney is correct. They can store this stuff. Data is cheap, man. When we're talking about the ability commercially to put 0.5 terabyte on this little thing that's in my fingers, 0.5 terabyte holds just about every phone conversation you've ever had in your fucking life. Do you understand that? This little thing can hold that, and it can be stored and stacked, and not only stored and stacked, but now they build these algorithms on people. So let's say they're not really interested in Mr. Smith and his wife so much, but they are interested in the community around them, where they shop, what service provider they have, cable in their house. You go on a million different things, and they're not only making I would say profiles on individual human beings through this metadata and then selling that information. They're doing it on localized populations. So I would just say every demographic, everybody with these magic devices everywhere, and they want more. That's why they're trying to sell you a fucking portal on Facebook with the Muppets, and it's going to be in your house, and it's got facial recognition for you and your family, and they want it in your kitchen so they can see how many times you go to the refrigerator and what kind of food you eat, because they already know what you bought because you bought it with your credit card. I mean, this is the erection of the complete New World Order regimentation of all human beings, social credit score type system that you're seeing beta tested in China. This is it, man. I mean, I don't want to go too wild. I think I might have, but this is what it's for. It's to make us all obedient, consumer, infotainment, celebritard worshiping mush. And I'm sorry, I still have independent thought. I'm going to fight it.
What I mean, if you look at what was happening the exact same time as the Kavanaugh hearings, Google's executives were testifying before a different Senate committee about exactly how the Chinese social credit system worked. And that information was given to people like Adam Schiff, who I don't know if he believes John Brennan, but he believes that he needs to do what he's told concerning what John Brennan says. And the fact that most people don't know that Google has already delivered all this information about the Chinese social credit score system to members of Congress, that there are working groups to study it. And I with pre-crime being a reality, I don't see how some form of social credit system will not be built into that or based into that as a just a feature. Anyone has anything to add to that, please, by all means, go ahead.
Well, you see the introduction of Facebook's currency too, to where they're bringing out their own cryptocurrency now, so that way they can have more direct control and information about what people are purchasing and when.
Yeah, but when I look at Facebook, I mean, it's such a leviathan and an entity. I mean, you look at Peter Thiel and his involvement in there, and you look at the fact that, again, Zuckerberg, initially, when he was talked to about Russian interference in the election, you can watch the clips, he laughed about it. He's like, $200,000 in Facebook ads didn't do anything. And lo and behold, 2 years later, he's in a suit bowing down to Congress in some kind of a scripted event where they don't even want to talk about ACR software, which makes the majority of what I just talked about possible. That's automated content recognition. That's what your smart devices actually use, and they patent. All right, that's how they do this, and it's through not only smart TVs but many other devices. I've done a ton of different videos on it. You can actually, look at the software and have them brag about in real time how they're listening into all this information to better advertise to you. This is a reality that's been around for a while. It's only expanding. I've got to jump, guys, because it's almost midnight. I want to thank everybody here for having me. I want to remind people to thumbs this video up, subscribe to this channel, Action for Assange. I'll hopefully be having all you guys on in the near future, including you, Ray. That's big news with the subpoena. I want you 15, 20 minutes. I'll make it painless. So make sure I get your email after this. But no, we need more action. We need more thinking minds. We need more people on the ground that are willing to put the work in and not just parrot some establishment bullshit because it feels good and gets you to join the group or the crowd. That's not what I'm about, because as that happens, what happens? Free speech gets eviscerated, and so do our civil liberties, and we're only seeing more of that. Thank you, guys, and I'll see you on the flip side.
Jason, before you go, Jason.
Yes.
There's a email on my website. Website is very hard to remember. RayMcGovern.com.
Okay.
You're
getting that email, Ray. You're getting it.
My webmaster, who's also my son, says I should always say, if you don't get it, you don't get it.
All right. I'll see you soon then. Thank you guys again.
I have to depart too. Good seeing you, Jason. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ray.
Thank you, Jason, so much.
Most welcome. Nice meeting you, however
Good night to
virtual.
you guys.
Thank you
now.
guys. All right, so we just had Jason Burmis on and Ray McGovern. We are very grateful to have them on. That was a great discussion. So once again, a big thank you to both of them for joining us and for being willing to participate in this conversation for almost 2 hours now. It was awesome. So thank you for everybody who's watching. Do make sure if you are new here that you do subscribe to our channel. Also follow us on Twitter at action_4Assange. We post a lot of information about Julian Assange, of course, and other related issues. Also,
And stick around, by the way, because we've still got stuff to cover. Like, I see people
We
starting
have a lot of stuff to cover tonight.
yeah, we're not done. We still have a lot to keep talking about. We have a lot of news that we do want to get into, but for everybody that's new, stick with us, or everybody stick with us. But if you are new, please make sure that you do subscribe to our channel and hit the bell. We go live every Wednesday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Every week we have discussions just like the one we had tonight, and we'll continue to have as we talk about the news. We have had some excellent guests on. We've had John Kiriakou. We have had a variety of guests who have come on here to speak with us, and it's always been very interesting. And this is information that you are really not going to be finding in many places. So thank you so much for sticking with us. But I know we have a lot of news that we want to touch on. So we can start. I mean, it doesn't really matter where we start. Maybe talking about the Spanish case to kind of describe what's going on with that. So we are going to move into our news portion of the evening. So just recently, we found out that Julian Assange will be testifying in a case in Spain, and this all has to do with a Spanish security firm that was spying on Julian Assange while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, as well as the people who had visited him. Specifically, they were targeting Russians and Americans, specifically those who were journalists in particular, and they were going through their electronics, they were recording their communications, and of course, this is a huge violation of not only privacy, but also Julian Assange's legal rights, which is his right to be able to have private communications with his attorneys, which is an attorney-client privilege that has clearly been violated by the Spanish security firm. There's a whole other case that's taking place, and Julian Assange will be testifying about that for this case, which is good news, because for a while I don't think we thought that he was going to be able to testify about this. So he will be able to. So maybe that could set an important legal precedent for his own case.
Yeah, so first, initially, the UK, when this was requested for Julian to testify, the UK said no. They essentially blocked it. So now I think it's still slated for December 20th. So Julian will actually be transferred to Westminster Magistrates Court to answer these questions via video link. So previously, the rest of his kind of hearings were just going to be done via video link from Belmarsh, and even the extradition hearings. So this is a chance maybe that we'll get to see him in public coming to Westminster Magistrates and leaving if people are out there, if Ripley's out there trying to spot the van he's in. But aside from that, this is really good because he needs to be allowed to testify. More and more we're hearing other people speaking out about how they were filmed, how they've found out that their meetings were being spied on. We have, Pamela Anderson's cell phone password was revealed, or not revealed, but like the Ecuadorian embassy got a hold of that. They were scanning people's phones while they were visiting him. So there's a lot of people impacted this besides Julian Assange, but it's very important that he is able to speak to this.
I want to make a point to the audience right now that for for over a year, every single conversation that Julian Assange had was being recorded and live streamed or immediately sent to the CIA by the Spanish security firm that was contracted to provide security to the Ecuadorian embassy. The fact that his extradition case hasn't been thrown out, the fact that he's still sitting in Belmarsh prison, the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom, as a political prisoner and nothing else, knowing that every single tenet of legality, of lawyer-client confidentiality, every single violation of civil right and liberty afforded to him under Ecuador's state constitution, or Ecuador's constitution, laws, under the UK, under the US, obviously through extradition charges, one of which has nothing to do with them whatsoever. Why this hasn't been thrown out and dismissed immediately speaks to the level of corruption and inherent, I guess, evil would be the best way to describe it, of our global intelligence state. There's Guys, by the time politicians actually get to look at the legislation that they're going to be voting on, it's already gone through the hands of multiple intelligence agencies, some of which don't belong to the countries that the legislation is going in front of. Um, we need, I guess, as why the show is Action for Assange. So we need action on this, and the decentralized activism that we talk about so often on the show is a great way for you to start. Be the protest in your town.
Do we know about like what kind of prep work he was able to do? Have we heard anything about like what information or evidence he was given beforehand, or his lawyers were given beforehand for the Spanish case?
I know the reason that they asked for a delay in the extradition hearing case was so that they could use the evidence from the Spanish case, hoping that that would wrap up at that point to be used to the extradition case. So I'm not sure as far as what from Assange or his lawyers was able to be presented. I don't know if they've spoken out on that. Obviously, when he was taken out of the embassy, he wasn't allowed to take anything with him. So if there was any evidence in the embassy, I don't know if the lawyers would have been able to obtain that to introduce it into this case. If anyone knows anything different, feel free to chime in, but I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is, we've talked about this before, about how this is such an overreach of power. Basically, the US was utilizing resources from a foreign company to get information on its own people, Americans, and even, non-citizens. So yeah, it's just a complete overreach. And again, like I said, we did speak about this before, but it is good that he's going to be able to testify. But of course, as far as like the specifics with his attorney's decisions on what moves they're going to be making next, we don't have access to that information. We're not members of his legal team, so we really can't speak to any of that. But this is good news that he will be able to speak. I think it will be interesting if we're able to have access to this information of what he's going to say. And then also too, what he's going to be like in his, I'm very curious as to how he will be as far as mentally and physically, because we know the past few times that he has been in court, he hasn't looked so well, was unable to recall his birthday, things like that. So hopefully, hopefully this will set a really good precedent or be able to help his case in some way, because of course we know that his rights are being impeded on, that he was surveilled, being that he was surveilled.
Well, and it should open up, actually, I guess I don't know how international civil suits work, but it should open up a whole different can of worms other than their CEO going to jail over this. Like the people who were surveilled, Julian's legal team, Pam Anderson, everybody under the sun, Craig Murray, um, everyone who went there, there should be some sort of recourse for them too, for the gross violation of their civil liberties that happen under the auspice of confidentiality and security. And I want to make another point about like the reasons to dismiss any charges against Julian Assange just keep stacking up. We already have a precedent set in the United States with dismissal of a lawsuit brought by the DNC against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, and Russia and Vladimir Putin, and like 2 Siberian tigers and 6 kitty cats and 1 refrigerator. Like they sued everybody on this, but the judge, who was appointed by Bill Clinton, so it's not like this is a right-wing activist pro-Trump partisan judge, dismissed the lawsuit, citing specifically the Pentagon Papers as the thing that gives WikiLeaks justification to do what they do. WikiLeaks, by the way, at 100% accuracy rating from this outlet. They have never had to retract a single word in the entirety of their existence. There is not a media outlet that can compare with that. And sure, there's jealousy on the part of stenographers to power, but more to the point, they are stenographers to power. They're represented by talent agencies. They're reading words off of a screen where they practice their serious face, or they practice their I don't get it face. And that's the extent of their job. They're not paid to think. They're paid to read words off of a screen. It's a really big problem with media, but it gives us a lane. And we're here to think with you and encourage you to do so yourself. Whether or not you agree with what we're saying, we want you to think critically about what we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, for everybody that's new here too, one of our goals is here, and I think what makes us sort of unique is that, of course, we are talking about Assange and related issues too, but we hold everybody accountable. We have no allegiance to any political party or any particular candidate. Everybody is equally criticized. We also have kind of taken it a step further to also hold to account not only the corporate media, but also independent media who maybe gets the facts wrong or who chooses not to cover Julian Assange when they absolutely should. So that's part of what our mission is to not only bring the facts to you guys and talk about issues that aren't being talked about, but to also hold people accountable when they fail to do so or just get things wrong. That is our mission. I know that we do have some other news items that we want to discuss further. Seems that there's some letters that are being signed recently. We've had the Doctors for Assange, and then just also a letter that was signed to the Archbishop of Canterbury. If any of you want to pick up on that.
Yeah, the Doctors for Assange had a follow-up too, as well, that just came out. But yeah, we can talk about the Canterbury Archbishop one first too.
Yeah. Where'd it go? This happened last time that I tried to pull it up. It didn't give me the actual. There we go. Thanks.
All right, I have to say, somebody in the chat said something really funny. They said Steve has a good memory for a hash smoker.
It's true. You would think that I wouldn't be able to retain nearly all. You know what? I get a big boost in Kratom and Lion's Mane, and also I ignore most of what my kids say to me. So I have space up here for the facts. Let's just go right to the letter here real quick. 61 intellectuals from 16 countries signed a letter that was delivered to Lambeth Palace calling on Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, to use his moral influence to end the unjustified imprisonment of Julian Assange. So including in this Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Mary McGuire, Noam Chomsky, Daniel Ellsberg, Oliver Stone, Francis Boyle, uh, chair of the Human Rights Committee of the Council of European Parliamentary Assembly, Dick Marty, and German Bundestag member Sarah Wagenknecht, and William R. Polk, descendant of the 11th president of the United States. You guys want to go over the text of the letter here? It doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, I want me to read it.
Yeah, sure. It's pretty short.
Okay. All right, so we, the undersigned, respectfully call on the moral authorities of the UK to use their influence to obtain immediately release of Julian Assange, citizen of Australia, from Belmarsh Prison, where he is being unjustly and cruelly incarcerated. Julian Assange is not charged with any crime or even misdemeanor in Britain and has fully served his sentence for his single offense, jumping bail to avoid extradition to the United States via Sweden. That's a really important point there. I'm going to read that again. Julian Assange is not charged with any crime or even misdemeanor in Britain and has fully served his sentence for his single offense, jumping bail to avoid extradition to the US via Sweden. He was not and is not charged with any crime in Sweden. That's another very important point. There were never any charges filed by Sweden for rape, just accusations and allegations, which we know were intentional, most likely from the hands of the intelligence community. The sole charges against him originate in the US on purely political grounds aimed at punishing Julian Assange for publication of accurate information provided by informed sources. This is a regular practice of all mainstream media, which now shamefully fail to speak out in defense of Mr. Assange, even when they published exactly the same information that he did. That is the New York Times, who I love to call out, and also The Guardian, and I believe that there may be another, but those two in particular have published the same information
Der
that we
Spiegel.
published.
It was.
Der Spiegel, yes, a
German.
German publication. So to go on, it is quite clear that in their current treatment of Julian Assange, the UK is debasing itself as a mere instrument of political repression exercised by the United States. Your Grace, the current imprisonment of Julian Assange is a blot on the nation's judicial system, a disgrace to British decency. This scandal may be largely hidden today, but will surely emerge in history unless measures are taken immediately by the highest representatives of the British people to correct this major injustice. We ask you to respectfully transmit this message to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II. We appeal to your sense of justice and of national honor to uphold the best traditions of British democracy and respect for human rights by calling for the immediate freeing of Julian Assange. That's a great letter, and I'm glad that I did read that for everybody because it has some really important points, and I'm sure you guys have some thoughts about that as well.
It was one of the most accurate statements that's come out in a really long time about his situation. It hits every point, it highlights it great, and we were talking about having the ability to communicate this earlier. This is a great letter to show to people. Yeah, I don't really know what Her Majesty the Queen can do, but
Yeah, I've seen some other petitions include her too.
Well, it is I mean,
So
it's not.
yeah, I'm not sure legally
It doesn't have
what she can do.
influence or the ability to direct at least a handful of members of parliament to get them to even say something. The fact that, I mean, they're having an election next week. Were they to successfully pull off Brexit before Julian's extradition hearing, then nothing the European Union or the International Criminal Court could say or do would affect them whatsoever. And that's the double-edged sword to Brexit. I agree with a lot of the principles of it. But there's a reason that Julian Assange told Gordon Dimmick, don't let them sacrifice me on the altar of Brexit. And this is why, so you have to have an influence government, you have to have enough people in Parliament who are getting pummeled with phone calls and emails from their constituents saying you have to let Julian Assange walk out of Belmarsh prison free and on his own volition with nothing hanging over his head. It's not going to fucking happen here.
It's not. He should also be compensated too for all of this. He needs financial compensation, and he needs
multiple countries
in any way that he can get. From multiple countries. Yeah, exactly. From multiple countries, he needs it. He needs immediate health care that should be paid for, money compensation, and assured a safe place to be, probably not known to the public, to be kept quiet. Yeah. So, I mean, he deserves so much, not just being freed, but I think that letter was very concisely and well done. There's also a follow-up letter from the Doctors for Assange group that has assembled recently, and we again encourage you guys to follow them on Twitter at doctors the number 4 Assange. They did just like I said, write a follow-up. If one of my co-hosts wants to pull that up and share it on the screen and perhaps read it for the viewers, and we could talk about that.
Do you want me to pull up the letter or the Canary article?
Just the letter.
Okay, then give me 1 second. Oh, god damn it. 2 seconds.
It seems that somebody in our chat is saying, I think it was Quinn, said that the Queen has veto power if she wanted. I don't know.
That's interesting.
That is really interesting if that's true. He said
he has some influence with the PM, I think still.
How do you still have a queen in 2019?
I know.
Like that's.
Right? I don't know. I mean, obviously their power has dwindled over the last century, but I don't know.
Yeah.
If anybody in the chat is in the UK and can fully answer that, please do, because I would be curious on what she can or cannot do.
Okay, here's the letter. And this again is a follow-up to the letter. Originally, there were 65 doctors who got together to write a letter to appeal on behalf of Julian Assange's health. This is a follow-up to that. We, the undersigned medical doctors, wrote the UK Home Secretary on Friday, 22nd November 2019, expressing our serious and unanimous concerns about the credible reports of the rapidly deteriorating health of Mr. Julian Assange and the possibility that he could die in a UK prison. Our open letter received worldwide media coverage, except for here in the United States, and countless letters of support from medical doctors and others around the world. Amongst other credible sources, our letter quoted Professor Neil Smeltzer, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, who visited Mr. Assange on 9th of May 2019 at Belmarsh Prison with 2 medical experts specialized in the investigation and documentation of torture. Professor Meltzer reported on the 31st of May that Mr. Assange displayed all the symptoms typical for persons having been exposed to psychological torture over a prolonged period of time, due in part to his judicial persecution and arbitrary confinement at the Ecuadorian embassy, as previously reported by the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. We are informed that Professor Meltzer's report of torture did not receive an adequate substantive reply from the British government, let alone result in the prompt and impartial investigation required under Article 12 of the Convention Against Torture. We are also advised that the British government has not yet responded to a further urgent appeal by Professor Meltzer dated 29th of October, in which he warned that the continued arbitrariness of Mr. Assange's treatment and detention may end end up costing his life. The UK government's apparent negligence and dereliction of responsibility are especially alarming, given that Professor Meltzer had issued a warning regarding Mr. Assange's state of health already shortly before the Metropolitan Police arrested, drug out, and helped aid the human trafficking of Mr. Assange inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London on the 11th of November. or I'll have November of April 2019. In the light of Professor Milzer's consistent and repeated warnings, including on the basis of a specialized medical assessment in line with the Istanbul Protocol, the UK government's refusal to take required measures to protect Mr. Assange's rights, health, and dignity appears to be recklessly at best and deliberate at worst, and in both cases, unlawful and unnecessarily exposes Mr. Assange to potentially irreversible medical risks. I am not going to keep reading. If anybody wants to pick this up.
We did get confirmation that it's called Queen's Consent is the name of the law. And yes, she does have power, veto power, I guess. So that's really interesting. I doubt she will, be able to actually take some initiative and do the right thing here. But it would be really great to see her do that. And it's good in general to see the pressure being put on her.
So I'll pick up the second half of the letter. As correctly predicted by Professor Melzer and his medical team, shortly after the team's visit to HMP Belmarsh in early May this year, Mr. Assange's physical and mental health rapidly deteriorated to the point later in May where he had to be transferred to the medical care unit of the prison and no longer capable of participating in court hearings at the time. It should not be forgotten that over 6 months have passed since the publication of Professor Melzer's unequivocally damning report. The UK government has not insert word the condition of Assange's detention since then, and not surprisingly, according to credible reports, Mr. Assange's medical condition has continued to deteriorate to the point that there is now real fears that his life is in danger. We submit that this serious medical We submit that this serious medical deterioration was entirely foreseeable and avoidable. The UK and the permanent member of the United Nations Security Council repeatedly ignored not only the serious warnings of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, but also its unequivocal investigative and remedial obligation under international and human rights laws. The credibility of the UK's commitment to human rights and the rule of law fatally undermined. In our open letter, we urge the UK government to change course immediately and transfer Mr. Assange from Belmarsh Prison to the University Teaching Hospital for appropriate expert medical assessment and care. So far, we have received no substantive reply from the UK government, nor has the receipt of our letter been acknowledged. In our opinion, the UK government's conduct in this matter is irresponsible, incompatible with medical ethics, and unworthy of democratic society bound by the rule of law. We reiterate our grave concern that Mr. Assange could die of deliberate medical negligence in the British prison and demand an urgent response from the UK government. As the present matter is of inherent public interest, copies of this open letter will be distributed to media outlets worldwide. Yours faithfully, open letter signed listed.
Yeah, so they didn't even respond to this letter. And of course, they have to do so. Like, they have to respond to Nils Melzer's report. And in addition to providing a formal response within a certain time frame, I believe they also have to have an impartial investigation into this torture that's taking place. None of that has happened. So this isn't really new news with regard to that, but it's good to see that some pressuring is being put onto those who can actually do something about this. All rule of law and all regard for the law has just been thrown by the wayside in this case. And it's important to keep circulating these letters to make sure people know that it's out there. And that's why we kind of talk about some of the same news stories here and there, not talk about the same ones, but kind of build off of them and reiterate old ones, because we need to keep the pressure on these entities and these governments who are failing to do their job and failing to act when they are legally obligated to do so.
I think it's just really amazing. The first letter was on November 22nd, and they didn't wait a very long period of time before initiating the second letter. So they are, like you said, really applying pressure and making sure that their concerns are addressed. And like Nils Melzer has said, many of his concerns have not even been addressed. I mean, these multiple countries are not addressing them. So I think it's really advantageous to keep pressure on whenever there are large groups of people that are coming together and writing these letters for Julian Assange. Is you just have to keep doing it over and over again.
There's a great line in that letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Uh, it says, "It is quite clear that in their current treatment of Julian Assange, the United Kingdom is debasing itself as a mere instrument of political repression exercised by the United States." You guys got to remember that the UK as a nation is not supposed to extradite people for political reasons, and that the case against Julian Assange is 100% political. It's because a government did not want them printing the things that they printed because of how it affected that government's status, that government's ability to disinform its citizenry, to murder people unchecked, to commit fraud on every scale, and no matter how grand or who gets screwed. That's what this is about: the political persecution of a journalist and publisher for the sole reason of better control of the populace.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And two, they are not allowed to extradite somebody. And most countries in Europe, if not all of them, who have extradition treaties with the United States, are not legally allowed to extradite anybody to the U.S. who may be facing the death penalty. We know that this section that Julian Assange is being charged under with the Espionage Act, he's not eligible for the death penalty. I know that many people say, well, 175 years in prison is the death penalty, but what they mean by that is like actual lethal injection death penalty. Well, we don't know that when he comes here that could also be added to the charges, and that the death sentence could be also a potential punishment if he is tried and convicted. So I think whoever wrote that letter, I mean, it's written very brilliantly, and it really shows the blatant disregard for law here. Somebody did have a comment in the chat. I can't find it now, but yeah, if you guys do have questions in the chat, do let us know and we can answer them. I thought I saw one, but I can't find it. But yeah, if you have questions for us, put it in there. Any other thoughts on this letter before we head over to the next topic?
Like, it just shows the rise of global tyranny. Like, it just, the letters specifically from or about Niels Melzer's report, the very end there that says unworthy of being a democratic society and the rule of law, is as clear and concise as it gets, because this is the final move towards global tyranny that we're trying to prevent at this point, because there's so many things intrinsic upon Julian's freedom that would have to change or begin changing about the world and the control systems that operate behind the scenes to run it, that this struggle is so much more than just one man. It's literally all of our rights to know what governments and corporations around the world are doing. And I feel like these letters express that better than anything.
Well, they certainly lend a completely different, completely valid, and utterly necessary viewpoint to it, because we're sitting here and we do our damnedest to advocate decentralized activism, spreading awareness about Julian Assange in our communities, through our social media accounts and whatever. But we're not the special rapporteur for torture and human rights abuses. We're not, Noam fucking Chomsky. We're not, James K. Polk's great grandson or whatever the guy was. Like, I'm trying to find nice ways to say that we're less credible than these people, but, or at least, they'll pass the smell test for the people at you know, ABC or CNN to maybe run a story about this. Nobody's calling Steve for an appearance on any kind of network program for what I think about Julian Assange. Well, for one, they don't have the capability to keep up with the censor button as fast as I reel that off. But no, it's fantastic that an international community of doctors and intellectuals and whatnot has come together to finally to make a very public statement about it, and I hope that it becomes something that people become more aware of. You
I
know,
haven't tried reaching out to him yet, but I would love to try to get someone from Doctors for Assange on to talk about what they're doing. I think that would be.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Do we want to go into the MP's visits to Julian?
Sure, let me pull that up.
So guys, if you are new here, as we're pulling that up, please make sure that you do like this video, that you subscribe to our channel, and also hit the bell. We go live every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we have guests, so many awesome guests that we've had on this show. And we also talk about the latest news with Julian Assange. So Steve, you got a fan here. Jack Seath said, Steve is awesome. Yes, he is awesome.
If
Like,
you guys are just
your
meeting me for the first time too, yeah, I have a show here on
Fan
YouTube
show.
called Slow News Day. I interview, I try as hard as I can to interview the people who write the independent media that I source on my show. I have had whistleblowers like John Kiriakou on. I just recently had Jared Beck, who was 1/3 of the DNC fraud lawsuit team. That was a fantastic conversation. And Gordon Dimmick was on that show in the second hour. Yeah, guys, stop by, get to know the program. And I have the MP thing. And again, this now becoming thematic to where after so much hammering by Nils Melzer on this, because he is, to his credit, has not just filed a report or two and then gone quiet about it. He is doing whatever he can to bring attention to this issue, and going on whatever outlet will have him on. And it's because of moves like that, and because of the Doctors for Assange letters start, circulating and becoming a thing, that we're now in a position where some federal parliamentarians plan to travel to Britain to visit jailed WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who the organization's editor-in-chief, Kristen Branson, says is in poor health and losing weight rapidly. That is a milquetoast way of putting it. Their Australian newspaper. Independent MP Andrew Wilkie, who co-chairs a group of parliamentarians working to bring Mr. Assange home, said the MPs hope to meet with Mr. Assange, his legal team, and British parliamentarians during the trip early next year. Man, that's cutting it right to the right before the finish line, isn't it? Let's see. He has attracted support from a diverse group of political figures, including former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, Deputy Foreign Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, and Green Senator Peter Whish-Wilson. Controversial Queensland MP George Christensen co-chairs the Parliamentary Friends of the Bring Julian Assange Home group with Mr. Wilkie. That is a mouthful. So only Mr. Christensen and Mr. Wilkie plan to travel to the UK. And this is
they're still saying that they hope, like this isn't really saying that they've been approved and are scheduled to meet him, but as we know, Belmarsh likes to kind of play games with Julian's visitors and the ability of giving him the proper amount of time during his visits. So hopefully they do actually get to see him.
This is a great quote from current acting WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, Kristen Hansen, though. Julian has sacrificed everything so that whistleblowers can shine light on this kind of serious wrongdoing, so the public can understand truths about our world and for the principles of press freedom. That's exactly right. We can't stress enough just how basic how much of a basic necessity an organization like WikiLeaks is to a society that even pretends to be free. If there's no holding the people who make our laws accountable, if there's no holding corporations accountable for the pillage that they can get away with, then we have fucking no reason whatsoever to call ourselves either free or civilized.
Right. I agree with that.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So, did we want to also touch on, well, I guess it kind of ties into the other article that we were referring to with Christian Crafton, right?
Yeah, so he's been in Australia this past week. He's done a number of speaking engagements in Australia. He's spoken at the National Press Club. I believe there was an event in Melbourne yesterday or earlier this week. And so he's kind of been going through and speaking to not only journalists but be involved with Assange supporters. They had sort of a like red tape cutting of the van that they covered with the Julian Assange Bring Julian Home, Somerset being graphic. I think it was John Shipton's van actually that they did that too. And so I saw a picture that they had a red ribbon cutting for that. So I thought that was kind of cool. And so yeah, that there's a few different articles we've had just of him, the different talks that he has given so far in Australia. I don't know if there's one specifically you want to focus on.
Well, I've got the consortium news interview with Kristen Frautzen now. We could play some of that if you would like. I don't know. It's up to you guys.
How long is it?
I have no idea.
I think it's like, I think it might be 15 or 20 minutes.
Lengthy, it's like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
We should maybe hold that for a minute. We and do that on one of our weekend UK live streams. But I'm glad you brought up Somerset Bean.
Yeah, we should transition over to him. That would be good.
Yeah, I'll pull that up and you can lead
So if
it.
you guys aren't already following or aware of Bean, Somerset Bean, you could follow him on Twitter at SOMESETBEAN, and he is a longtime supporter of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange and creates all of those graphics that you see just about everywhere about Julian Assange, specifically naming facts and talking about how many days he's been in prison, all of that. Any of those major graphics you see, he creates those. He does some fantastic work. So absolutely do follow him on Twitter if you don't already. Unfortunately, he received a very, very disturbing email from Google, okay? And we will pull that up. I think Steve's going to be pulling that up. And basically, it's important to keep in mind as well, this is a graphic designer, an activist, a supporter of Julian Assange, a supporter of WikiLeaks. I believe he's also not, well, I think it's fair to say that he's not American.
Yeah, I believe he's an Australian.
We believe he's Australian in the UK, but he's not American. And we're going to pull up this letter. Apparently, he is being investigated by the US DOJ. And here's the email that he received. I guess I could, want me to read it?
Damn it. Yeah.
Okay. Can you make it a little bigger? Oh, okay. It says, Dear Google user, Google received and responded to legal process issued by the U.S. Department of Justice, District of Columbia, compelling the release of information related to your Google account. A court order previously prohibited Google from notifying you of the legal process. We are now permitted to disclose the receipt of the legal process to you. The agency reference number or case number on the legal process is da 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 da. For more information about how Google handles legal process, view our transparency report at, they provide a link. Google is not in a position to provide you with legal advice or discuss the substance of the legal process, and they encourage him to contact an attorney. But basically that is, and he says here, have emailed Google requesting the relevant information. Any doubts this email is genuine? It is genuine. What's really disturbing here is that the US government was using a tech company, a tech giant, Google, to access information on an activist who supports WikiLeaks and a graphic designer. And here he describes it. The connection here is with the Mueller inquiry, and specifically this has to deal with the 2016 email leak. Is that correct? And this is the first time I'm seeing this.
Yeah, so if it's related to the Mueller inquiry, then assumption would then
has to be.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're going after a graphic designer just shows how desperate they are to grab at straws, but also how much they want to try to intimidate everybody else. Because this is one dude that everybody knows.
Anybody with any connection to WikiLeaks, even the graphic designer who does graphics for their top 10 major stories that they release, or is supporting his Free Assange, the publisher's Free Assange movement. He does graphics all the time with different quotes and pictures of Julian. So this is really, I think, a threat from the government to all activists of, we'll come after you and we'll just ask Google for your information. We'll just throw a warrant at them and they have to abide.
And at this point, I think our answer should be challenge accepted.
Yeah.
And that's, to plug it real quick, that's the power of encryption. You can use basic encrypted messaging like Signal, Wire, and a few others. And that basically stops intelligence dragnets from grabbing your information and just automatically processing you through all these systems. Other good ones are a Tor browser or some other form of VPN. And essentially what it does is it makes intelligence agents have to directly target you to be able to get information off your device and see things that you're doing. So if you're sending pictures of cat memes and talking to your mom and then talking with some of your activist friends, when they get in there, 90% of the stuff is going to be a waste of their time, money, and energy to look at. So it helps to pull resources away from these groups that have unlimited funding but have a limited amount of manpower to actually look at what people are saying. So get as much encryption as you can. We've done a couple vigils about encryption specifically and about cybersecurity. So I'd say look back and check those out. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely watch if you missed it, watch the vigils that we did with Sean O'Brien from Privacy Safe and the Yale Privacy Lab. He is a just, I mean, fountain of technological information, and it's so worth diving into. There, some of the stuff was a little bit over my head, but as we established earlier in the show, I smoked the pot. And I
my head too.
Not.
He's a very smart guy.
Yeah, he is. But he's able to break it down, and basically what we encourage people to do is use Signal, Wire, use the Tor browser. There's other apps you can use. Of course, none of them are 100% safe proof. Again, like Andrew was saying, if they want to own your phone, they can own your phone. However, it does make it much more difficult for them to do that, because to get your information, if you're using encrypted communications and encrypted services, they have to do that on a targeted individual basis to do that. So it does make it more difficult, and it wastes time, money, and energy for them to do this. So it's really easy to encrypt. And as Julian Assange said, It's a lot easier to encrypt than to decrypt. And I'm not going to steal Andrew's favorite line of the book, Cypherpunks. Are you going to say it?
No, you can say it.
No amount of force can solve a math problem. I just know you like that quote, Andrew.
I love that quote. That's my favorite quote out of that whole book.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah.
My one of my personal favorite Julian Assange quotes is two things that I really enjoy, and that's helping out people who are vulnerable and crushing the
Too
best.
fast. Yes. It's one of my favorite ones too.
Yeah, he's really a brilliant writer. And again, we're going to keep up with our like book clubs and stuff because we want to get on that. But we have a lot going on right now and a lot to plan for. And part of that planning is about our ambitions and our goals for February of 2020. Like we've mentioned many times, Steve and I intend on going to London to cover the extradition hearing for you guys. We will be live streaming and we will be covering this information hour by hour, minute by minute, letting you know exactly what's going on. We'll be showing you footage, of course, like I said, via live stream. We'll be posting videos, all of that stuff, talking to important people who are there. We'll have a lot of preparation prior to our going there. So you guys are updated on the facts and know what's taking place. So if you do help us make it there. Also, our co-hosts, Christy Doff and Andrew Smith, intend on going to DC at the same time to be holding meaningful, peaceful protests at significant locations to show support for Julian Assange, for WikiLeaks, and bring awareness to the horrible events that are taking place across the pond at the same time. So they will be there organizing peacefully and holding meaningful demonstrations. And we need your help to make this happen because it is expensive and it is so worth it because you will have accurate information and you will see exactly what's taking place and you'll be able to help us get there, help us have meaningful protests and all of that. So any donation is extremely beneficial to us and we're extremely grateful for that and thankful for that. So I bet one of my co-hosts put the donation link in the chat. Christy, thank you so much. So yeah, please, if you can donate, if you can't, that's completely understandable. Not everybody has the luxury of being able to do so. Just circulate that link on social media. That's also super helpful. Now, in addition to that, I know that we did want to address some plans for weekend shows. Do we want to do that or do we want to?
Sure. I mean, we need to really like sit down with Gordon and nail it down. But yeah, we're going to have I don't know if it's a series or one nice long throwdown hosted by Gordon Dimick coming up here soon, and that will be on his channel. I know we were trying to get Bean on as well. And then was it before Christmas or is it actual?
We would like to do it before Christmas if it works out for everybody's schedule. And yeah, we talked about sort of having like a mini telethon with Gordon, and so yeah, we're still putting that in the works, and then yeah, trying to get some of our UK guests on. That obviously it's like 3 or 4 in the morning right now for them, so it's difficult for them to come on at the time that we normally do this. So yeah, we're hoping to get that sometime this month, hopefully at least. So be on the lookout. We'll definitely announce that once that's happening.
There's also the Embassy Cat Vigil.
Yep. Yes. I was going to say we're in the plannings with Ron Placone to make a special Embassy Cat commemoration video or live stream. And he actually said that he'd be streaming it on his channel at the same time too. So I'm super excited about that. But in case you don't know, interesting thing, December is like Feral Cat Awareness Month or some shit like that, like Rescue Cat Awareness Month. So I just thought it was a cool idea. We can kind of build some bridges, bring some cats on. So I think it'll be
and bring some cats on.
I think it'll be fun.
Lovely. That is. Oh, not.
So, yeah, so if you guys can help us, it's so appreciated. We do have a few other things that we wanted to touch on. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this is just something that's really personal to me. So I want to give somebody a big shout out. Flick Ruby on Twitter at FLICK Rubicon, RUBICON. This happened to me. I got fines against me for not climbing the Parliament building in the UK, but for hanging posters in the city of Oberlin, I have to pay him like $300 some by January 1st.
And this was in
so-
Australia, actually.
Yeah. So I just want to say that I want to see more people doing this, and this is super exciting that this happened. And I hope that we can get this going everywhere. Like, I hope that we can turn this kind of simple, direct, clear statement, free speech activism into something that just really takes off as a way to communicate to our local communities and to make impactful and symbolic statements. So I just want to give a big shout out because that's a badass picture.
And unlike in Andrew's case, the magistrate said his action was commendable.
Right. You can actually, if you're
Yeah.
interested, the prosecutor in my case was actually a total bitch. I use that as the nice word that I could use. That's up on my Facebook page. I didn't put it on our YouTube, but I'll download it eventually and upload it on there.
Speaking of prosecutors who are also bitches, Kamala Harris dropped out of the U.S. presidential race here the other day. Yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yes.
What's hilarious to me is that maybe 15 or probably at that time, like less than 12 hours before, Gavin Newsom gets on Twitter and he's like, I am really excited about being out there in Iowa to campaign on behalf of Kamala Harris
Oh,
this
wow.
week. He was supposed to come out like today or tomorrow to Iowa
Wow. I
campaign.
didn't know that.
He didn't tell him
Oh, no.
going into the what? Okay, I understand that she's a dead-eyed, soulless, heels-up careerist. I get that. I do. But you're supposed to let the people who are coming to speak on your behalf know when you know that you're dropping out of the race. Like, how freaking, I don't know, maybe shallow, narcissistic, sociopath, whatever. She knew that he was going to advertise this. She thought maybe it would get a couple of more eyeballs. We should get a last minute donation out of Gavin Newsom showing up, Mayor Handsome, fucking governor.
Why would he come to Iowa to?
Because he's the governor of California.
I know, but nobody,
Who else
nobody
is
here is
left?
gonna care about him. Like,
He's handsome. He is one handsome fella.
And he's
I don't
rich.
think so.
What I
I don't
hear.
think so either.
I think he's
I don't know.
disgusting.
I don't
But
think
yeah, I mean, just how fucked up.
That just seems really tone deaf to
yeah.
bring more Californians to Iowa, because when you're in the Midwest, you get really fucking tired of the West Coast calling you flyover and telling you you're obsolete and that you don't matter. So why would you want to bring more people that have that attitude here? Like, I just don't
it is
understand
so out
the
of
logic
touch.
to that.
That's so out of, yeah, you're right. It's so out of touch.
Oh,
And trust me, I like California quite a bit.
right. I
But
mean,
it's out of touch.
it's just, and obviously that's why she's no longer in this race, because she's doing stuff like that. It's just totally out of touch, not resonating.
I called this well over a year ago on Slow News Day. Pat the Burner was on, and I told him that if she makes it to the primary, that they moved up here in California, because we used to go first week of June, right ahead of the convention. It was like the final nail in the coffin for whoever was to have California decide what, But they moved it up to March, and they moved it up to March because a couple of years back, the Hamptons ordained Kamala Harris, and she received the blessing of the donor money. She had a lot of Hillary Clinton's campaign staff working for her. Hillary's staff really went between Camillary and the white woman of color, Elizabeth Warren, um, and there was another God, Kirsten Gillibrand, I think, originally got a lot of HRC's uh, staffers, but you look at the tone deafness of her campaign. You look at the fact that if she's ever forced to go off script, she just freezes up like a demonic doe in the headlights, like just locked and incapable of uttering a cogent sentence. She had a campaign about nothing, based solely on Trump bad, I'm brown. Like, she tried to make it about her record as a progressive prosecutor. I lived here for that shit. She won attorney general. She won by less than a percentage point to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed poster boy for the Lebensborn, for fuck's sake. Like, this guy was all but an out loud Nazi and just as authoritarian, and campaigned on how tough on crime he was going to be. And Kamala Harris used her record as district attorney to say, no, look, I'm just as tough as crime on this guy as this guy. I am just as vindictive as this piece of shit.
Yeah,
I check off the identity politics buttons.
Yeah,
Isn't
and
it
also
interesting?
too, I think Jimmy Dore was Jimmy Dore covered this about the responses by the various candidates who were basically trying to get her followers and supporters onto their campaign. And specifically, I think it was Pete Buttigieg said that she has stood up for the voiceless and the victims and those who don't have a voice. And I'm like, she's a prosecutor. Like, what are you talking about?
Pete Buttigieg means consultants and snipers, and like he's not talking about regular people. You see how CIA reacts when regular people get anywhere near him.
Right. Yeah.
The guy just
I don't remember which publication it was, but somebody put out, the opinion piece that Camilla is a cop was such a racist term, and it's what tanked her. And so it's like, yeah, like Steve said, she was running on her record as a prosecutor, but then, whether it's coming from her camp or just her supporters, now they're mad that somehow turned into a bad thing for her. And it's just the mental
it's pretty delicious
gymnastics
that
we're
they're
doing.
blaming. It's pretty delicious that they're accurately blaming Tulsi Gabbard for tanking her campaign, though. Like I think they're unintentionally giving her credit for something that she did well, and they don't mean to. Like, they want it to be an attack. The Russian Assad toady fucking whatever she is brought down a fine upstanding woman like
Yeah.
So I just want to call it before it happens. The headline, "Come from Behind Counsel on Former Foreign Relations Member and Former DNC Vice Chair Wins Nomination." I want to make sure that everyone remembers that the vice chair position of the DNC historically has always been groomed to assume high positions of authority within the power structure of the democratic system when they win the presidency. So just keep that in mind, because there's a person that everyone kind of likes that's the former vice chair and a former council on foreign relations member.
Yeah.
It's got a few too many pictures with Sheldon Adelson's wife, honestly. I don't know. No gods, no masters. Don't make heroes out of fucking politicians.
Yep, make them meet you in the streets. Like, if you're someone that believes that this person stands for the issues that you believe in, stop supporting them until they meet you in the streets for those issues. These are candidates who historically have met people in the streets for issues. Bernie Sanders, for example, marched with Martin Luther King. I'm very proud of him for that. I respect the fuck out of him for that. But there's another set of civil liberties that we have to stand up for. And we need leaders to march in the streets. And if you're not willing to march, don't join us. Like, don't feign that you stand up for this or play 4D chess, because like it's not his life that's on the line.
Right. Again, it's so frustrating. I mean, we talked about it before. It's so, and I don't want to get into it too much, but you know, the excuses that are made, again, these candidates, the people that could pull them in the right, I want to say the right direction, but not literally politically right, but the people that could pull them further to the left and in the appropriate direction to be better on the issues is their base of supporters. So that's why we always say, okay, with Sanders, you can't just give him a pass on this. His base of supporters, if they put the pressure on him and people in his campaign, like the staff members, put the pressure on him, they have the real power to push him in the right direction on this issue and to say something. Instead, you know, people have this idea that he doesn't work for us when he does. And everybody needs to remember that these politicians are working for us. They have to prove to us something. We don't have to prove to them anything.
Right. And I just think it's when we have people come in the chat and talk about how Bernie doesn't owe us, our channel,
Yeah, like
you know, anybody these answers, I just think
that's
that's
crazy. It's
really,
crazy.
yeah, and it's an apology, it's an excuse, and it's not well received here. That's for sure. Like, that's not going to cover why he still hasn't taken the time to come out and fully said 100% that he supports Julian Assange. Like, it's
I
just,
don't I don't understand that mentality at all. Like, I don't understand. I see it week after week, and
yes.
I do not understand it. And we explain it week after week.
And it comes up even when we don't talk about it. So it's not like we keep bringing it up. It's
No.
something that has just been continuously brought up in our chat, on our show, online
And
on
I'm really
Twitter.
glad that we get the opportunity to inject that thought, because I support socialized medicine. I support protecting our environment. Like, I support a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders stands for, short of taking guns away from people. But at the same time, we're at peak corruption. Like, we caused slavery again in Libya. Like, and to not stand up against that and to not stand up for the people that reveal that is disgusting, especially if you're someone who's trying to stand up for rights and freedom and justice.
So I want to thank everybody who's new here. I'm just seeing in the chat some really nice, supportive comments from you guys. Somebody said they're totally on board with this channel. Thank you. That's awesome to hear. Please do subscribe to us, like the channel. Also, Steve, one of the co-hosts, he has his own channel, Slow News Day Show. Check him out. He's so funny. He talks more. We tend to focus on Julian Assange and related issues, but he talks about all kinds of political issues in addition to Julian Assange. So do check out Steve's channel because he's really funny and always has original ideas and isn't copying off of anybody. It's all original thought. And I think that's what makes his show especially unique. So to everybody that's new, make sure you subscribe to us and Steve's channel. Do we have any other news? Any other news items we
Real
want to
quick,
talk
I want to pull
about?
something out of the chat, and then if there's news or whatever, type what it is, let me know what it is, and I'll pull it up. Jack Sith, what about Ro Khanna, who attacked Tulsi and voted for the Patriot Act? Ro Khanna was Silicon Valley's money's choice for Congress. He ran against a guy named Mike Honda, who was much more to Ro's left. Not once, but twice. Mike Honda beat him in 2014. And then again, people like Peter Thiel backed Ro to the hilt, and he bought his way into that seat. He had that seat paid for him. There's a great quote by a guy who wrote a book called The Four. I think his name's Scott Goldman, Goldman or Goodman, one or the other. But it's about Apple and Google and Facebook and um, maybe Twitter, I can't remember, one of the other big Silicon Valley giants. But the quote about Ro Khanna is Ro is a smart man and a thoughtful man, but he's not a member of Congress. That's the seat that belongs to Silicon Valley. And that's what he's there to do, is represent their interests. And he gets to go out and he gets to talk progressive. He was a voluntary Justice Democrat before just us Democrats went out and endorsed people. But you will find him on the side of both the national security state and the contractors that they go through to achieve the ends to surveil us without warrants and use all of our data for whatever purposes they want every single time. That's Roe's job. And if he is not one of the moles inside of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, I will come to your house and I will build you an addition labor free.
So, propaganda brought something up here. So I just want to read something real quick. Quinn said, more slavery today than any point in history. And that is 100% accurate. So I want to read something that we call the 13th Amendment. Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2, Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. We have a for-profit prison system and a drug war that's specifically designed to target Black, brown, and minority and impoverished communities. We have more African American men in jail performing slave labor today than we did when slavery was legal in the United States. And it's people like Kamala Harris that allowed that to happen and facilitated the expedited growth of the American slave market. So that's something that really touches me, to make sure that people understand we have more slaves in this country now than we did 200 years ago. And it's legal.
Yeah, like when I found that out, that was just mind blowing to me. And I think that is a really important fact to keep bringing up.
Absolutely. So Christy, do you want to give some important dates that are coming up?
Yeah, so there are, so there's a couple court hearing, these will be video link court hearings for Julian this month. So one on the 13th of December is an administrative court hearing, and then a provisional date, which that means it could change, the 19th of December for a case management hearing. I don't know if there are going to be any in January. So these might be the last few before the extradition hearing, and there could be more after the new year, of course. But so just keep your eye on kind of people you follow on Twitter to kind of see, and obviously we'll talk about them here as we learn news. But as we get closer to February, these things are important to pay attention to see what changes, if anything good changes in favor for Julian to prepare for this extradition hearing. Also something that was kicked off this week, actually there's a couple different ones. People are recommending to send postcards for Julian to the UK Home Office, and the Don't Extradite Assange campaign actually kicked off a Christmas card initiative to the UK Home Secretary. And if you go to their website, don'textraditeassange.com, you can find, I believe, some templates even to print off to mail. So that's a big initiative. Last year at this time, we were sending him Christmas cards in the embassy. And that was a little bit of a nicer, even though it wasn't a great situation, gosh, it's kind of, it's just really, I don't know, eye-opening about how much has changed in a year and what we're doing differently now for Julian, as opposed to what we were doing a year ago.
And we have to remember right now, you can't send like a Hallmark Christmas card to Julian or to Chelsea. has to be, I don't know if it can even be a handmade card with drawings on it.
I think it has to be a letter. I think,
Yeah.
I know
I'll
Chelsea, I
pull
think,
that
can get
up
some
right now.
drawings.
We'll go over what it needs to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Chelsea and Julian's what they can accept are different because they're in different prison systems. But yeah, make sure if you're going to send them something for the holidays, make sure you look at the criteria, because you don't want, that to be
And
rejected.
I want to encourage everyone to do that. I want to encourage you, when you buy Christmas presents for your friends and family, to match that with donations to WikiLeaks, even if it means buying smaller, more meaningful gifts for people, because that would go a really long way. Or give the gift of a WikiLeaks hoodie or something, because they need all the support. They have legal cases around the world right now.
Yeah.
So I know we're asking for our GoFundMe money, but I want to make sure that people know donate to the Courage Foundation, donate to WikiLeaks directly through the shop or through their donation links, and donate to Chelsea Manning and Jeremy and all the rest of them if you can.
All right. So is that all we have for tonight before we close out?
I think so.
I think so. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody who is watching us every week. And I also want to thank our new viewers. I think we had a few tonight join us. Make sure that you do subscribe to our channel and hit the bell. We go live every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Taylor Hudak. You can follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak. I'll put all of our Twitters in the chat too as we go around. Again, yeah, I just want to thank everybody for watching and joining us, and for supporting Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, and for caring about these issues, and for spending these 3 hours with us. We really enjoy interacting with you all in the chat and answering your questions. And then I also do want to thank Ray McGovern and Jason Burmis for joining us earlier this evening. We had a really fantastic episode. I really enjoyed this discussion, and I could see that my co-hosts are nodding their heads. Well, you guys could see them too, because we're in the block thing. Usually you can't see them. So that's why I said that. I'm so used to saying that. But yeah, all of us are just loved this conversation tonight and really appreciated it. And Ray McGovern, I mean, he dropped a bombshell tonight, and I'm sure we'll be learning more about that. He's going to be going on Jason's show, I believe.
Oh, I'll be emailing him as well. That is incredible. I not just Ray McGovern, but Bill Benny, and did he say a couple other people in VIPS too, or VIPS as an organization?
I think VIPS as an organization.
Includes articles that Ray wrote. Like, this is phenomenal. If this is what makes Seth Rich a household name again, I am fucking here for that.
Yeah, so do watch out for that. And then I'm sure he'll go on your show, Steve, for sure, to talk about that. That'll be really, really interesting. But again, like I said to everybody, do subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, follow ActionForAssange on Twitter at action_4Assange. Again, my name is Taylor Hudak. You can follow me at _Taylor Hudak. And also too, Susie Dawson is a journalist and an activist who supports these vigils. Of course, she is one of the co-founders of Unity 4J, and was very instrumental in putting together those vigils, and was a part of those. And once those stopped taking place, we kind of took over, and she supported us. And she also just recently launched a few months ago the One versus 5i campaign, which is all about one woman, Kiwi journalist and activist Susie Dawson, taking on the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes is a Western intelligence alliance among 5 Western countries. She exposed them through her journalism, which was circulated by Julian Assange and WikiLeaks on Twitter. And it is because of her journalism and activism being so valuable, and her work being so well done, that she, like many whistleblowers, journalists, activists, and political dissidents around the world, became a target of the very agencies that she held to account. So she's taking on these agencies to ensure, in a court of law specifically, to ensure that they could no longer be targeting people whose viewpoints do not, yes, there's a campaign. You could follow it on Twitter at the number 1, the letters VS, the number 5, the letter I. You could follow it there. That's a picture of Susie. You could also learn more about the campaign at oneversus5i.com. It's a great way to fight against the surveillance state and to take on these powerful agencies who control and manipulate every aspect of human society. And we know this because their own documents tell us that they do this. They control the media, they've infiltrated the media, they control technology, they control global politics, they control our own political structures and our government. And that is a fact. It's no longer up for debate. So that is why I said earlier in the stream today, please, support somebody who is already taking up this fight. She's taking up this fight. So do support her. Check out her work on YouTube as well at Susie3D. That is SUZI, the number 3, the letter D. Her work is awesome. Please check that out. And then also, if you are able to donate to her campaign to empower her financially to hold these agencies to account, you may do so by visiting oneversus5i.com/donate. So again, thank you guys so much. And I'm really grateful for everybody new who joined us tonight and for everybody who consistently supports us.
You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Zigman. My DMs are always open. Currently for DC, I really hope people can get involved and get out there. If not, be the protest in your city. You have plenty of time to start practicing, plenty of time to get friends, family, and people that you'll meet doing it involved with you. I want to give a shout out to a couple protest dates coming up. December 10th is #Human Rights Day. December 14th, there's a protest in, I can't pronounce that, Trafalgar Square in London. There's also a protest in Italy as well as Mexico on the 14th. On the 15th, Melbourne, Australia. December 17th is Happy Birthday Chelsea Manning Day. So I want to get everybody ready to start sending letters now, so that way she can get them by the time it's her birthday. And then the December 19th, #I am Julian Assange. And then a few other upcoming dates. December 10th is the British Journalism Awards dinner at the Holton Bankside. And then December 19th is the Westminster court date with Julian Assange on the video link, I believe.
And Steve is sharing right now the Julian.com. You can follow them at WriteJulian on Twitter, or you can go to their website and get more details about writing Julian in Belmarsh and kind of the do's and don'ts on what they do accept and allow him to have via mail. So yeah, please share our GoFundMe and donate if you can. That would be amazing. That is in the chat right now. And otherwise, I'm Christy Doff, and you can follow me at Christy Doff on Twitter.
And I'm unmuting me. My name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it here on YouTube at least until December 10th. I do my goddamnedest to not use the CIA-fed mainstream talking point propaganda as the baseline material for my content. If I can, I will interview the independent journalists whose work I cite on the show. If I'm not going directly to the documents itself, I have incredible interviews with all kinds of people that are absolutely worth watching. I do not cover the horse race as I'll put out, I don't put out 8 videos a day and 7 of them have Elizabeth Warren's name in the title. That's not my show. You can follow me on Twitter at Slow News Day Show. And you can find the show on YouTube at Slow News Day YouTube / Slow News Day Podcast. Let's see. Yeah, if you have the ability to, please donate to the GoFundMe. Thank you all for being a part of this with us. We love you very, very much. as always, go out and do an action for Julian Assange. And if that's, you don't want to go out in public, write the letter. Um, well, yeah, thank you. And thanks to my co-host. You guys rock. Good luck to us all.